Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Security Industry Association's Vertical Insight Symposium on Higher Education Security. I'm Ron Hawkins, Director of Industry Relations for SIA. I'd like to start by thanking our sponsors for their generous support, Access Communications and Century Enterprises. We very much appreciate their backing of this project and all of their activity as SIA members, so thank you very much to both of those great companies. The Security Industry Association is the leading trade association for physical security businesses. We have more than 1,400 corporate members, including manufacturers, integrators, service providers, and others. We provide a variety of government relations, learning and development, technical standards, networking, and other resources and services to our members, all of which can be found on our website at securityindustry.org. And we are the premier sponsor of the ISC West and ISC East trade shows and conferences. Today is the latest in our Vertical Insights Symposium webinar series, and we have a great mix of security practitioners from higher education institutions that span the country who will talk about their experiences, along with security professionals who will offer their thoughts on technological solutions to security challenges. In addition, we will look at the latest research findings in the college and university security market. Leading off today, we are pleased to have one of our two keynote speakers. Joe Monroe has been the chief of the University of Kentucky Police Department since 2009. He has been a consultant with the Department of Homeland Security since 2003 and an adjunct professor with the Texas A&M Engineering Extension Service since 2012. He is one of the most highly regarded voices on campus safety and security, is active with the National Center for Spectator Sports Safety and Security, and is a frequent presenter at conferences and events. Thank you, Chief, for joining us, and we're very excited to hear from you.
Thanks, Ron. Well, welcome to everybody. And I want to take some time to follow up on what Ron said. We really want to make sure we thank our sponsors. Access Communications and Century both do a great job in the higher ed market. But you've got to have partners. And that's one of the things that we're going to talk about as we kick off this symposium today. But thanks to Security Industry Association for hosting this symposium on the issues that we're facing in higher education right now. Today, you're going to hear from industry subject matter experts focusing on some of the key issues in higher ed, dealing with everything from cybersecurity to physical security, including I'm going to give you a little case study on access control. And you'll also hear some more today about that as well. As we kick off this symposium, my hope is and goal is to leave you with some key messages, some lessons learned, the mistakes that we made on our projects, and hope that you'll be able to think about that as we move through these presentations today to get those key takeaway points. Lessons learned are probably one of the biggest things you need to think about. So as we get started, to give you a little bit of background information about the flagship university for the Commonwealth of Kentucky, that being the University of Kentucky. This year, the university will welcome its highest enrollment ever in the 158th history of the institution with over 35,000 students. So with that has come many challenges. The Lexington, Kentucky campus is home to the largest level 1 trauma center in the state of Kentucky. The UK healthcare system, which makes up a large part of our campus, consists of 4 different hospitals with a total bed capacity of over 1,500 beds. Faculty and staff, you add those together, along with our daytime visitors and our patients in these hospitals, that brings our daytime population well over 70,000. That presents us a challenge. Basically, the campus becomes the 3rd largest city in the state of Kentucky. So I'm going to go back a little bit to 2012. The university experienced a high-profile incident that really identified the need for a security solution to enhance campus safety and security. When we started researching what was going on our campus as far as security technology, we identified over 64 different disparate security solutions. None of them talked to the other one. Throughout the campus, there was no standardization, there was no centralization for the security solutions. That was the problem. So we set forth on a proposed plan that was originally adopted by the University of Kentucky Board of Trustees for an estimated scope of about $4.8 million. That project was slated to take 36 months and consists of 4 different areas or components. Here we are in 2023, over 10 years later, and that project is still ongoing. It's not because of any delays, it's because it has grown. We are now pushing about $18 million in security technology investments into our campus. So I talked about 4 components of this plan. The first was we needed a video management solution and cameras across our campus. The second component was to incorporate access control systems into our buildings. More important was the development of a multifunction campus identification card. At that time, we had a paper card. There was no card that even had a picture of the individual, whether it was faculty, staff, or a student on there. Now, we have a solution that is multifunction that serves everything from access control to food services. It works all across our campus, from our healthcare enterprises to our education and office buildings. And then the final 4th component was that of designing and implementing an early warning notification system. So today we are looking at about 4,000 cameras on the University of Kentucky security system. We found a reliable video management solution. And then our next step was the access control. We now have 9,000 plus access control readers on our campus. That allows us to have remote lockdown capabilities. And the way we designed our system was we could lock it down with the press of a button, the whole campus or parts of campus based on different geographic regions. Our team is now currently in the process of upgrading these readers to allow for mobile credentialing access through cell phones or wearable devices. This is the wave of the future. An early warning notification system that reaches over 95% of our campus through outdoor speakers and desktop phone notifications. Now let's step back and talk a little bit about the journey, how we got to this point, because this project was not without some headaches, a lot of frustration. The original video management access control system that we had was actually part of a project through our capital projects division. The police really didn't have a lot of input into the selection of it. And that video management and access control solution was not operating efficiently and resulted in system failures and even crashes. These crashes became a regular occurrence. Now, I want to talk about a takeaway point for you. I mentioned earlier in the beginning, I want to talk about takeaway points. One of them that's very important is relationship building. That relationship building needs to be both internal and external. And I'll talk about internal within your organization and within your campus environment. External, these are the stakeholders across your networks that really need to be a part of it. These are your support integrators, your vendors. They become your partners. And I said our team was beyond frustrated with this original solution. So I'm going to back up even a little bit further to about 6 weeks prior to the problems started developing. I was at a sports security conference, an NCS4 conference in Indianapolis, Indiana. And I was approached on the exhibit floor by a sales rep for an integrator. When he approached me, I really wasn't interested. I felt at that time our system was operating fine. I wasn't interested in having that sales pitch or that pushy salesperson, trying to tell me what I should have on our campus. He offered to buy me a drink. I really didn't want to do it. But I said, all right, what's it going to hurt? I said, no sales pitches though. Sure enough, we met at the bar, had a drink, some appetizers, and we talked. And he asked a lot of questions about what our system was, who our current solutions were, and and just reached out as a friend, so to speak, and said, hey, listen, if you ever need something in the future, here's my business card. So he slides his business card over to me. I throw it in my pocket thinking, it'll go in the stack with the rest of the 200 that I have on my desk. He said, hey, if you need anything in the future, give me a call. So we left, parted ways. 2 weeks later, our system crashed, and it crashed beyond repair. At that point, it essentially just started to implode on itself. We became very worried because school was getting ready to start. Students were getting ready to return, and here we rolled out this system that no longer worked. I basically ate crow, swallowed my pride, as my grandfather used to say, and you guessed it, I picked up the phone and I called my new friend. And I say new friend because now we've been friends for over a decade. He immediately listened to what our problems were. He assembled a team, and he drove that team to Lexington. They arrived here the week before campus with engineers and integrators. They helped us get that existing system back operational, enough that we were able to kick off the school semester. Long story short, they stabilized it, and then we worked on trying to find a better solution. That integrator I trusted at that point because they were here to help us at no cost. And when they did that, that showed what they were. They were a partner with us. So that meeting at that sports security conference, that drink at that bar, developed a long-time partnership with our integrator that still exists 10 years later. So what did we learn on this project as it kept growing? And I mean, it keeps growing. As I said earlier, we now are putting in all these extra things. We are growing this project every day to add more cameras, more access control points as we grow as a university and identify more needs. Another thing to think about is strong leadership. Strong leadership is required for this project to be successful. It is helping identify who your partners and stakeholders may be. And I talked about that early, identifying who those people are, both internal and external. As we developed our project, some of our internal partners and stakeholders we talked to, and those may have been our information technology team. It may have been our card holding office for our ID cards. It may have been our food service industry on campus. It may have been our healthcare IT folks. All these people were going to be touched by this new project. So we really had to get the buy-in from them and input to make sure we had the best solution. Our next thing was building out a technology team to support this project. And like I said, that's both internal and external. Information technology teams are great, but having that team housed within your organization that focuses directly on supporting that daily is important. What we did, we developed our own security technology team from the ground up. And one of the things that we did was choosing that right integrator allowed us to make sure that we had an embedded person from that integrator on site. That embedded tech person is now part of our team for our security integration team. They work hand in hand daily with our team. That is how we choose the right partner, because they were the ones that were going to fit our organization. We weren't going with the lowest bid anymore. The lowest bid did not work for us before. The next thing is thinking out of the box. We've got to think out of the box as you design this project, plan your solutions. One of the things we realized is, as many of you all probably do on your college campuses, we have those emergency phones. And those emergency phones, I know here at the university and a lot of other universities, don't get a lot of usage. So we talk about removing them, taking them out. We did a study, found out we had a 3% usage over a 5-year period with those phones. We didn't feel like it was cost effective. They were old analog phones. They were an eyesore. They needed to be replaced. We announced that we were going to take them out, and we had an uproar from parents and students alike. So we had to find that solution that worked for us. So we worked with Talkaphone, those blue emergency phones that we wanted to go with because it was a UK blue, and we put them all over our campus. We now have almost 85 of those laid out across our campus in strategic locations. But now we use it more than just an emergency phone. We've put in those phones IP fiber net that allows us with these routers to use them for hotspots if needed. We can use them for the emergency phone piece, but we also have outfitted each one on the top with a 360-degree camera. That allows us to get more camera footage across campus. Also, those phones now have at the top a loudspeaker. So I talked earlier about that early warning notification. So when we push out our alerts, whether it's weather related or a critical incident, we hit one button that sends it to all our devices, whether it's desktop phones, speakers, text messages, or phone calls. So those blue phones have that speaker that allow us outdoors to push our message out. That allows us to have that 95 to 90% coverage across campus. The next thing to think about is design standards. And I credit my deputy chief and his team for really taking the initiative to develop our design standards in security for all our buildings. So now it's a requirement with our capital projects division that any building that's being built, renovated, or retrofitted has to meet these design standards for security. So it's everything from emergency phones to campus access, control readers, cameras, and our emergency notification system inside those buildings. This really has allowed us to grow this project tremendously fast. The other thing is we have to continually be able to identify movements in the industry. We got to be able to think about what is next. And that's where mobile credentialing came into play. We realized that more and more people are starting to rely on their cell phones, their wearable devices, whether it's an Apple Watch or a Samsung Watch. These type of wearables now are being used for everything from payments, access control. So we have to continue to look forward into the future in what is the next need. So as you can see, I like to highlight lessons learned. You're going to make mistakes along the way, but it's okay. Learn from them, grow from them. I've been truly blessed to have an excellent team of professionals that continue to make this project a huge success every day. They are the ones that deserve the credit for our success. I'm just the one that finds the money for them. Our team is always happy to share what we learn from these projects. Looking back, we never had somebody to help us along the way. We never had those best practices. So we are always trying to give back and share our knowledge as well as our lessons learned. Never underestimate these opportunities for building relationships. I think this is one of the most underrepresented areas that we don't focus on enough. Because think about this. Who you meet today may be the person you need on your team tomorrow. All right, now let's pivot and talk a little bit more about some of the other current and future issues that higher ed is facing. Our college and higher ed institutions face a wide range of security issues due to their diverse and open nature. Our college campuses are often large and open environments, which makes them very vulnerable to unauthorized access, theft, vandalism, and other physical security breaches. Now, campus security teams must be able to address the issues related to student and staff safety, emergency response protocols, and event and incident management. In an age of rapid technological advancement, our campuses have become digital landscapes. And you've seen me talk a lot about that already. That campus bustling with this digital information and innovation. This digital transformation has brought a lot of benefits with it, but it's also exposed us to an unprecedented cybersecurity threat. As guardians of knowledge and intellectual exploration, it is our duty to safeguard our educational environment from these lurking dangers that threaten to compromise our values and disrupt our mission. The first and most glaring concern, as I said, is cyber attack and data breaches. We have witnessed numerous institutions, along with private and public organizations, fall victim to these relentless cyber criminals seeking to steal the sensitive information, wreak havoc on our systems, steal our data, and even hold them hostage. These attacks not only jeopardize the privacy of our students and our staff, our patients at our healthcare institutions, but also the integrity of our research. We've got to fortify our defenses. We have to prioritize our security protocols and establish resilient mechanisms to thwart these malicious attempts to steal our information. Moreover, the prevalence of insider threats cannot be ignored either. While trust is in the foundation of any academic community, we must be able to recognize that a few individuals may misuse their access to our systems and our networks. That's why it requires a lot of vigilance and proactive monitoring. That is essential to detect and address these threats promptly. The importance of academic research security is another growing area of concern that can't be overlooked. Our higher ed institutions engage in cutting-edge research that may be targets for intellectual property theft, and espionage from foreign nationals, especially when the research findings have a large commercial value or even a national security value. The rapid proliferation of Internet of Things, commonly referred to as IoT, these devices pose another set of security vulnerabilities. The increase of IoT devices on campuses, including smart devices and connected infrastructure, can create security vulnerabilities if not properly secured. From the smart classrooms to the connected infrastructure, these devices offer great convenience, but also become gateways for unauthorized access. Robust IoT security measures are crucial to maintain and control and prevent exploitation by our cyber adversaries. Let's not overlook the looming dangers of phishing and social engineering attacks. Cyber criminals have become increasingly sophisticated in crafting deceitful messages, preying on the naivety of our students and staff. To combat this, we must empower our community with the knowledge and awareness to recognize this and have the mechanisms for them to report these threats. I talked about ransomware. The menace of this ransomware looms large. We've seen it in major cities and healthcares that have been crippled and paralyzed their operations, endangering their sensitive data this year. To mitigate this risk, we need to compromise and have comprehensive disaster recovery plans. One of the things that we did was we built a disaster recovery and resiliency center on campus. We have built and hiring right now for a cybersecurity response team focused strictly on cybersecurity issues. Furthermore, our relationships with our third-party vendors and our partners should not be overlooked. These security practices must align with our standards and our mission, but we should also foster a culture of shared responsibility in securing our venues. That shared responsibility, whether it's a IT network or it's a physical feature on our campus, a building, everything needs to be shared responsibility. Compliance with our data protection regulations, it's non-negotiable. We must be able to uphold our commitment to our student privacy and our research confidentially. Adhering to all our relevant state laws and our regulations, and ensuring our processes are in full alignment with them. So as colleges increasingly adopt cloud-based services, ensuring that our security of cloud environments and data stored in these clouds, that becomes critical. Adequate cloud security measures are vital, given the growing reliance on our cloud services for data storage is even more critical. We must embrace the cloud with caution, though, ensuring that our data remains secure and accessible only to those with the proper authorization. Addressing these security challenges requires a comprehensive and multi-layered approach of cybersecurity, physical security, risk management, and awareness training. Collaboration among all our stakeholders, including our IT teams, our campus security, our campus police, our faculty, our students, our staff, is essential to create a safe and secure environment for everybody on campus. Finally, talk a little bit about security awareness. Security awareness must permeate our academic community, regular training and education on cybersecurity best practices. That helps empower our students and staff becoming that front line. To address these issues, higher education must invest in robust cybersecurity measures, regularly update their security policies, stay vigilant among emerging threats and technology. Collaboration among institutions is even more important. What may work for one institution may not work for another. One institution may have been attacked, cyber, physical security, whatever. They need to share that in a best practice. That helps us learn from this. So as we confront these security challenges, I want us to remember that our collective effort will determine the safety and security of our academic institutions. Together, we can foster an environment of resilience and vigilance, one where knowledge can flourish without fear. So now, what does the future look like? What are some of the future solutions? We're exploring here with our team, live streaming from body cams or in-car cameras back to an operations center, a real-time crime center that has all this built into it, from our patrol cameras to our cameras on campus that allow for us to have a better situational awareness. We've talked about and exploring virtual patrols, having a person that patrols campus through the cameras. They're basically looking for the stuff that may be wrong. They're looking for those criminal or suspicious persons. Some of the other things we're looking at is drone patrols, being able to deploy drones ahead of an officer response or to get more situational awareness. And then I talked about the wearable devices. I think that is one of the biggest things that we're going to see a huge increase over the next couple of years, is these wearable devices where people are using them to access everything they need in a daily, whether it's phone call, their payments, access control, news, text messages, whatever. These wearable devices are going to be the next big thing. So I think I'm out of time here, but I want to thank you all for your attention and letting us take up this vital mission for higher ed security today. And you're going to hear a lot more as we go through. Hopefully you'll be able to get some insights and lessons learned as you go through this afternoon. Ron, I'm happy to answer any questions if we've got time.
Yeah, thank you so much, Chief. A lot of great takeaways. One that really stood out for me was the interaction with integrators, or that particular integrator, and just security companies in general. It's not about, hey, buy my product. It's about building a relationship, forming a partnership, and finding solutions together.
That's exactly right, Ron. I would value that as number one over the product, is having a partner, whether they have a product you're using, but having a product that is trusted and works, but more importantly, having that person that you can rely on, that's not going to just give you the sales pitch. They're going to give you the honest response.
Right. All right. Yeah, we do welcome questions. As Chief said, if you're watching on Zoom, you can hit the Q&A button. If you're watching on LinkedIn, you can also submit questions there. We do have one already. So you mentioned design standards, that you've incorporated those. Where did those standards come from?
So we call those Division 28 standards. And if somebody would love to shoot me an email, I'll be happy to share those documents with them. You can reach me at joe.monroe, MONROE, at uky.edu. And we are happy to share those standards with anybody that requests them.
All right, awesome. And looks like we have one more, and then we'll jump to our next panel. What policies did you put in place to be FERPA compliant for your camera usage?
So we don't put anything in the classrooms. Everything is outside of the classrooms. And that's something we had to focus on with our healthcare institutions as well, to make sure we were HIPAA compliant. So everything is outside in common areas. It's nothing that is private. It's all public space.
All right. And David and Bob, I apologize. I'm just going to squeeze in one more question here. Is your integrator that is doing access control the same company that is handling financial transactions?
No.
All right.
We have an integrator that helped us through the different softwares to be able to for them to talk to each other.
All right. Perfect. All right. Again, thank you so much, Chief. Really appreciate it. Awesome presentation. And
thank you.
I know you said you won't be able to make it to ISC East this year, but hope to see you at West in the spring.
I hope to make it back out.
All right. Take care.
Thanks.
Thank you. All right. Next up, we have a physical and cybersecurity overview with David Johnston from CISA and Bob Newark from Montgomery College. So I am going to pull up your presentations. While I'm doing that, if you wouldn't mind, could you tell us a little bit about yourselves? David, let's start with you.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Ron. And thank you, Chief Monroe, for sharing your wise lessons learned there. I work for the Department of Homeland Security, specifically CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. So our agency throughout the United States, there are 16 critical infrastructure sectors, and we cover pretty much every one of those, from water, wastewater, to commercial facilities, to colleges and campuses, universities, and the education sector as a whole. So today we want to talk a little bit about the services that we offer for both physical security and cybersecurity. They're all available at no cost to everybody on this call. They're all taxpayer-funded initiatives. So we'll talk about those here in just a couple minutes. Bob?
Howdy all, I'm Bob Newark. I'm Associate Director of Public Safety at Montgomery College in Rockville, Maryland, a community college from Montgomery County. I spent 29 years at the University of Maryland at a campus very much like the University of Kentucky, large public research institution. After I retired, I went to the George Washington University, worked there for a year and a half, went then to St. John's College in Annapolis, a very small liberal arts college adjacent to the U.S. Naval Academy. I was Director of Public Safety there for 7.5 years, and just this January came on board here at Montgomery College. So I've kind of run the gamut in higher education and public safety. It's a pleasure to be here.
All right, thank you both. David, I'm going to pull up your presentation here. All right, can everybody see that?
Perfect. All right, next slide. Okay, we've already talked a little bit about CISA and our importance in national mission. Once again, here's those 16 sectors that we talk about. One additional point on this slide that you can see that our organization, CISA, is what we call the SRMA, the Sector Risk Management Agencies, kind of like the lead agency at the federal level for that. And we work with our other partners across all sectors. Right now, education falls under government facilities. It's actually a subsector, but there is discussion about making it a 17th sector on its own, as well as elections for an 18th. But for right now, we definitely cover K through 12 and colleges, universities, both on the private and public side. Thank you. Next slide. So I work in Maryland. I'm a supervisory protective security advisor for all of our assets in Maryland and Delaware. But you can see we have a footprint nationwide, as well as our partners out there in Kentucky. They're in Region 4, which is headquartered in Atlanta. The big thing at the end, we're going to show you an email if you want to get in touch with myself or my counterpart across the United States or any of our territories. You'll be able to reach out and we'll have a one-on-one engagement with you. Next slide. And next slide. So within our portfolio, we divide it on the physical side and the cyber side. And we're going to talk about those assets and capabilities that we have available for both. On the protective security advisor, just imagine that being the physical. And so on a day-to-day basis, we're interacting with partners like the chief, as well as other members of the private and public sector. About half our work is with the private sector. So Fortune 500 type companies or smaller organizations. And the other half is with the public sector. So, college universities a lot of times fall on both of those, but we definitely partner with them and all the companies and organizations that support them in any fashion or role. We do that by going out and meeting with people like we talked about today. We don't endorse any one product or service, but we'll give you a vendor neutral opinion and impression. So for instance, he talked about the cameras and lighting. We have products we develop with Oregon, Idaho National Lab to go out and conduct those assessments. And we'll provide you not recommendations, but what we consider options for consideration because those are voluntary reports. We also will work for special events and we call SEER ratings. A lot of times at college events, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute, the stadium is one of the key places on campus that draws a lot of people from both the campus and off campus and is the potential for an incident. So we do a lot of support in terms of those types of facilities. And obviously post-incident and the recovery phase. And we do a lot of education. And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit too. One example is our Office for Bombing Prevention. Next slide. Everything I'm going to talk about today, even though I've divided in those two buckets, physical security and cybersecurity, convergence is the way of the future. I will tell you a lot of partners, no matter if you go to a small mom and pop type organization or a Fortune 500 company, or a state level government, even today, a lot of times those are siloed operations. Our adversaries will look at our weaknesses and they will find the weakest area. And that may be on the cyber side or maybe on the physical side, or the attack may start on the cyber and move to the physical. So it's important to have that convergence and those chain of command and the communications and any kind of reporting mechanism. A good example is insider threat. If you have somebody who's an insider threat from your IT side, you have to be able to have that reporting shared with people on the physical security side, which a lot of times in terms of college and university would be the police or the safety department. Next slide. Here's the stadium security we talked about. So this is a very busy slide, and we're actually going to share the actual full-size fact sheet graphic with you following this meeting. But what I will tell you is these are all vulnerabilities. These are all avenues of approach that a foreign adversary or domestic violent extremism or an insider threat or any other type threat could basically penetrate your organization. And so it's wise to be able to involve people from facilities and legal and HR, as well as safety and security, as well as representatives from the organizations participating at special events when you get terms in analyzing the threat and reporting any types of discrepancies. Next slide. So we talked a few minutes ago about the Office for Bombing Prevention. OBP is what we call an organization. We have a lot of great classes that we can bring to colleges, universities at no cost. We do it routinely. One example, we have an IED search procedure, so improvised explosive device. That's somebody making a bomb and how they place it in a classroom or on campus somewhere. and how you can respond to that. And those type of courses involve descriptions of what the current tactics, techniques, and procedures are being employed by foreign adversaries and domestic violent extremisms and other organizations, all the way down to searching for the device in the room. We did the same thing for VBID, vehicle-borne improvised explosive devices. And we also have a 3-day surveillance detection course that we come in and we work with local law enforcement, state law enforcement, federal, and our partners in colleges, universities to educate about what is out of the place and how do you respond to that. And really the basis of that is see something, say something, but it's a great course. It spends about half the time in the classroom and half the time out in the field trying to detect possible threats. And all the way down to explosive blast modeling on the, you can go ahead and do the next slide if you want. That's a resource we can bring in for larger facilities that will actually, we'll do some modeling using DITRA software and offer you some options for enhancing the facility, whether you're going to do a renovation or just future considerations. We have a lot of products out there, and I will tell you, every one of these products has been developed in partnership with somebody in the field, somebody like yourself. Whether we have a vehicle ramming tool we've developed with Chicago PD, or if we have that stadium tool we've developed with other universities, or whatever it may be. These are living products that are constantly being improved. And a couple more we have out there are physical security considerations for temporary facilities. A lot of colleges and universities are used for graduation, not only for their own organization, but also for outside partners, outside high schools, et cetera, and organizations. So you have to be able to integrate with theirs, just like you do integrate between your cameras, your lighting, your access control. You have to be able to integrate your plans with theirs and their operations as well. So this fact sheet talks a little bit about that. And resources for civil unrest. Unfortunately, colleges and universities have been a location for those individuals and organizations to consolidate or conduct their operations. So it's an opportunity to be aware of what those threats are out there. The last time, as the chief pointed, you want to know those resources and have those contacts and those relationships well before an incident. You don't want to be meeting someone in the unified command the day of the incident. You want to do it beforehand. And that's where tabletop exercises, discussions, drills, those type of things come into play. Next slide. So everybody's heard about see something, say something, right? Remember I told you these are all living products. So we've, in the last year and a half, come up with 2 additional products. The first is the power of hello. Imagine that you're standing at the stadium at a gate, or you're at a special event, or you're just walking across campus and someone doesn't look like they should be there, right? Well, if you look at someone and you say, hey, how you doing today? If that person doesn't want to maintain eye contact, doesn't want to say hello, doesn't want to take their hands out of their pocket, is wearing a long jacket on a hot summer day, with carrying a backpack, acting suspicious, and they don't want to engage with you, that is a huge red flag. And you can see in bold on the top. It's kind of hard to read here, but we're going to show these products with you separately. The oh no concept. So you observe, you initiate a hello, okay, you determine it's a risk. Now you go call the chief and his team and have them come out and respond. Always call 911 or whatever number it is in their area that operates. Don't ever call the chief's cell phone number personally, because he may be off. He may be in a meeting. He may not have it. 911 is designed there to help people in need immediately, and you want to mitigate and prevent something from happening. On the de-escalation front, on the next page, we have a really good set of sheets, and the next page on this fact sheet actually lays out the type of terminology and how the type of questions you can ask. You don't want to ask yes and no type questions. You want to ask open questions. You want to stand what we call outside the X. You don't want to, if they had a knife or sword in their hand, they could reach out and touch you. You want to stand back far enough. It's always good to have 2, 3, 4 people there if you indicate. So let's say you're at a stadium and you're taking the tickets and a suspicious person shows up. You try to engage with them, they don't. You have a way of basically alerting your supervisors behind you, and additional people can come up and you can try to de-escalate that situation. And just like CPR, simultaneously calling 911. Next slide. Everything that we talked about here today, specifically those assessments, Congress has initiated a program called the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information. That means when we come out and we walk the campus with you guys, that all of the reports we provide can be classified PCII. So that's going to prevent somebody coming to the federal government and saying on the Freedom of Information Act or legal proceeding that we want to see that document, because it's going to show your potential weaknesses and your vulnerabilities, and we want to keep that private. So we take this information very seriously. Next slide. So the two tools that we're going to talk about, you may have heard, the IST. Once again, these are developed with Oregon Idaho National Lab. That's a detailed walk around, usually a single facility and about a 3 to 4 hour conversation. And then we provide you about a 40 to 50 page report that's in a matrix type format with those options of consideration. And so it's very detailed. It goes into all these perspectives about your plan, security plan, emergency action plan, continuity, contingency plan, how your security force is postured, as managed, different types of utilities and dependencies and redundancies, cybersecurity, everything you see there, it covers. Very detailed conversation that we customize and drive to your organization. Next slide. An abbreviated version of that is the SAFE. And a lot of times I'll tell you with a college or university, we'll do an IST on the large administration building, and then on subsequent buildings, like for instance, a science lab or an auditorium or a power plant or a water treatment facility, we'll do a SAFE to augment that report. So the desired end state is going to give you those options for consideration for you to develop your 1, 3, and 5 year plan or your top 10 list as you determine appropriate. Next slide. Exercises, we talked about this a little bit. That's another option we can bring to the table. We can have, we call a tabletop in a box. I'm going to show you an example here in just a second. Or we can, and where you can do it yourself, or we can come in and facilitate discussions as well. The key is convergence, because the enemy is going to look for your weakest area, and you need to be able to look at that not in 2 separate silos, but as a unified approach. Next slide. As an example, we have one that's developed specifically for our higher education for an active threat. And you can basically click on that QR code or that link. You can type that URL in, and it will take you to the list that shows all of the scenarios. And then from there, you can drive down to higher education. And it's a complete packet, all the way from the invitation to the SIT manual, to the slides, the after action report, the accountability. It's everything you need to do. All you need to do is take a few pictures of your campus, post them in that PowerPoint, and you can drive your own exercise, or we can come in and help you with that as well. Next slide. And next slide. Accompanying our physical side, we also have cybersecurity assessments, and cybersecurity advisors do a very similar mission, but they focus really with your IT people. So a very similar perspective. We're looking at risk, we're looking at mitigating strategies, and how we can work together. Once again, all these services are taxpayer funded at no cost to the partner, whether you're public or private. Next slide. This is a busy slide, but this is all the services we offer on the cyber side alone. Now, the great thing about it, if you look on the right side, right inside the slide, you'll see where those products go from the strategic C-suite level all the way down to the technical network administrator. The 2 that I'm going to focus on today are in the top blue bullet points, and they're focused on cyber protective visits, which is kind of like a meet and greet, hear about your operation and kind of develop a plan going forward, and cyber performance goals, which is very similar to the SAFE. It's going to go through and ask you a series of questions. Next slide. So once again, very straightforward. Cyber protective visits, one of our cybersecurity advisors, and we have about 100 nationwide, and we have about another 100 physical security advisors. A lot of time we work together. Come out to your facility, we'll sit down and hear about your operations, take a tour of your campus, and then we can actually, in partnership with you, develop a program that could augment your plan to enhance security of your facility. And that typically involves people from IT, CISOs, CIOs, et cetera. Okay, next slide. And on the cyber performance goals, think of this as like those 38 questions that they're going to ask you on there, everyone should be yes. Very easy. We can either facilitate this discussion for you, or you can do it yourself as a self-assessment. And if you answer no to any one of those 38 key questions, takes about 30 to 45 minutes to do this assessment, it will basically come back and tell you the option for consideration for taking the first step moving forward to rectify that. All of our cyber products are based off the NIST standards, and you can read more about that at this URL right here at the bottom left. Next slide. And the cyber hygiene, also our vulnerability scanning. This is a service you can sign up for. And imagine it like hiring a guard to stand outside your campus and let you know if suspicious things are coming on campus. It's a no-fee service that we offer that we can basically help you monitor your network traffic outside your networks to help mitigate any kind of risk that may come up. Next slide. And that concludes my presentation. I will turn it over to Bob to talk about ICLEA and his great initiatives there at Montgomery College.
Wait for it.
Give me just 1 minute, guys. I'll
Board.
this presentation.
I just put together a little PowerPoint so I wouldn't just be a talking head. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so just a quick overview of higher ed. For those of you in higher ed, this can be everything you already know. And for everybody else, it might be the same. But just to give some different kinds of institutions you're facing, land grant, public research institutions, large state universities, things of that nature, that are generally very large geographically with large student populations. University of Kentucky is a great example of that, as is my own alma mater, University of Maryland. Private colleges, I worked at one of those. They tend to be small, liberal arts institutions, generally cash strapped. Some of them are quite having a hard time struggling financially, but they're out there, they're all around the country. Community colleges, where I'm at now, which are essentially focused on their specific role in the community, helping students who did not make it into four-year institutions to give them that stepping stone to move forward, and then to engage in workforce development and develop skills that might be then used in the local community around them. And then, of course, the Ivy institutions, large private institutions, generally better situated to address their security issues. They tend to have a larger endowment, larger budgets, and things of that nature. All of that to say that these are generally open institutions. It's rare to see a fully gated university or college. There are some that are out there, but they're generally open in the spirit of academic freedom. And with that comes, what I have the two flowers up there, is the armed versus unarmed, because in higher ed, it will literally run the gamut. Everything from armed police, and you'll find that your larger state universities tend to be sworn law enforcement, to smaller institutions that might have armed or security officers. It might even include unarmed police, and then everything in between with limited powers of authority, strictly observe and report, and so on. So it really runs the gamut in higher education. Next slide. Issues that we face in higher ed starts with academic freedom. This is often where the faculty get involved, especially in research. It's all about academic freedom and collaboration in the research. So if they feel any limitations to their research or their freedom as academics, you'll often get pushback on that end, which then kind of takes you to privacy, civil rights issues. This often comes up as well, particularly when it comes to like facial recognition or issues of how data is stored, who has access to certain data, security information, things of that nature. Freedom of movement, again, is a big part of higher education. Intellectual property, that's something that we're kind of seeing news, or not new, but that we're recognizing more as a potential vulnerability. Our faculty members are esteemed researchers in the fields. They may travel abroad, presenting at different conferences and so on. And so they're bringing with them that intellectual property of their own. We have foreign students here in the US engaging in research as well. And then there is a threat or concern about protecting that intellectual property and so on. So that's something that's become recognized of late. Export controls, as well as our faculty engage with foreign governments, foreign institutions abroad, that they need to be aware that their technology, the things that they're sharing, their research projects might have some export controls, and you should be cooperating with an export control officer for the institution. Then on the right side are some of the laws that affect us. Chief Monroe kind of referred to some of these. FERPA, the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act, which governs student records. HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act, that governs health insurance information as it applies in higher ed. The Clery Act, the full name is the Jean Clery Disclosure of Campus Security Policy and Campus Crime Statistics Act. It is specifically or specific only to higher education regarding crime stats, emergency notifications, and annual security report. All these things have to be made public, and that is governed by the Clery Act. And then, of course, Title IX, you might know that as sexual discrimination in the sporting world. It goes beyond that in higher ed. It goes to sexual misconduct and so on. So all those things factor into these higher education issues. In addition to that, consider that buildings are often mixed use, everything from classrooms next door to labs, that be next door to a radiation facility or a biosafety level 3 lab, or even a public facility, all enclosed in one building. You might have institutions like when I was at the George Washington University, where it's in the downtown heart of Washington, D.C., and the streets belong to the city. When you're on campus, you're on the sidewalk. As soon as you step in the street, you're off campus till you cross to the other side, that kind of thing. So you have public streets that cross through. You have immediate communities right off campus, local community members making use of facilities on campus, attending events on campus, and so on. Excuse me, or maybe even presenting problems for your campus. And then, of course, access control for students and whatnot. They might have access to a building one semester, and that might change them in the next semester and so on. That might even apply to your faculty, but usually less so. Yeah, okay, thank you. Next slide. Some of the concerns that we see, things that you would imagine, right? Active shooter, of course, is number one. One example here is where it ties into the physical security aspect. Michigan State University was the victim of an active shooter back in February, I think it was. And there's now lawsuits being filed about that because there's allegations being made about malfunctioning doors that couldn't lock, deferred maintenance issues, things of that nature. So that is now coming back to bite the university, or at least something they have to defend. So those concerns that come up. Human failures is a big thing. The chief also kind of alluded to this earlier. We're talking about processes and procedures, people not obeying or not abiding by proper protocols, whatnot, that presents a vulnerability to the institution. This, of course, leads to cybersecurity issues with like phishing and things of that nature, cyber threats, ransomware, data breaches, and all that. Swatting and bomb threats, we've seen this become an issue in higher ed around the country. The bomb threat issue is prolific. Swatting, if you don't know what that is, that's somebody making a false 911 call of, say, a hostage taking or shooting, generating a large law enforcement response. Some of these come to the campuses. There have been a few now that have actually gone to the local 911 center where the university or college is not even involved in the call. And all of a sudden, local law enforcement shows up in droves thinking that there's some kind of an emergency situation when in fact there may not be. The other issue that we often find is faculty and staff involvement in emergency preparedness, or maybe I should say the lack thereof, where they often don't get involved. And we need them to get more involved and be part of that planning process and that awareness process. Student activism can be an issue, whether it be political or otherwise, where the students become activists of their own nature. Student mental health concerns, we've seen that skyrocket since we've returned from the COVID pandemic. And then non-student issues, which can involve homelessness, mental health issues, and then just local community members who present problems on your institution. And then the last one, of course, is artificial intelligence, the whole AI thing when it comes to academics, and then what that might pose for cyber threats as well. Next slide. Some of the wishes: layered security for multi-purpose buildings, because you might need restricted access in some parts and open unfettered access in others. And then kind of what we've already discussed is the single platform systems, access control, cameras, alarms, alerting systems, tying those together, what they refer to as convergence. I think that's where the future is. We're going to see more of that, but that's really what we're looking toward. So access control, video management are often something that we use. It's behind the scenes. It's locally hardened. But things like some of the AI systems being built into the back of systems, smart occupancy sensors, cameras, and analytics that can tell you about prop doors, things of that nature. We're seeing all that come about. Those are some of the wishes. The biggest challenge that we have, and I know you all hear this, is the budget, the budget, the budget. All right, next slide, please. Cybersecurity. So on the box on the left are kind of the integration of the public safety folks with the cyber folks, right? That's where we interact with cybersecurity when it comes to our tech-based platforms like access control, cameras, and alarms. And also keep in mind that public safety is then often used on campus to alert the campus community about cyber issues, hoping to reduce liability. And then on the right are some of the issues that we have, which is, migrating to cloud-based systems. So we have some of that shared security, which kind of puts the onus on you as the vendor. The target of networks and cyber attacks, concerns about hacking and those vulnerabilities. And then, of course, ransomware, we're seeing that everywhere. Application and website outages, how do we guard against that? And what do we have in place for that? Hardware and software failures, and then, of course, performance degradation over time as things are less effective. And what do we have in place to move that along and to keep that going? Chief Monroe mentioned social engineering. That's certainly a big part of this. So something that we're always very aware of. Next slide. So just some examples, just two from recent age. This last year, Get Mobile by Seaboard, where they had a access control app on smartphones that students could use, and leave it to a college student, right? There was one that managed to hack the app and gain access to other parts of campus where that student shouldn't have been. Just last month, Progress has a app called Move It Transfer that affected a number of higher ed institutions, breached sensitive personal financial information. Some of the campuses that were affected don't even use Move It Transfer, but they were compromised because they affiliate with, say, the National Student Clearinghouse Research Center, TAA, CREF, that use the same data. And so that breached and migrated into the institutions for higher education. So just the way that can change and morph over systems. Next slide. Physical, of course, it's about safeguarding facilities and our campus communities as a whole, denying access to those areas considered secure, protecting the interests of the institution, and then reducing liability by acting as a response and reporting mechanism. Next slide. This is going fast, folks. All right, there are opportunities here. There's been mention about training, like the Office of Bombing Prevention through CISA. There are other things. There's the National Domestic Preparedness Consortium. That is a national organization, and there's three main parts of that I want to point out. TEACS out of Texas A&M that has MGT 361, which is specific to higher education. Louisiana State University has a sister component to that, MGT 324. That's also very much like that. And then through FEMA itself, the Emergency Management Institute, the L0363 Multi-Hazard Emergency Management for Higher Ed, and then emergency planning for campus executives. So there are other opportunities out there. These are often these are often no cost because they're paid for through your taxes. So it's something to avail yourself of if you're interested in that kind of training. Next slide. And then something, oh, sorry. And there's my little shout out to CISA, but that's fine. Stay where you're at. Just because CISA does provide a wealth of resource. I used them when I was at the University of Maryland. I am new here now at Montgomery College, but we'll be talking in the near future. Networking is a big thing. Chief Monroe already mentioned this. I can't stress this enough. There are organizations out there to do this. IACLEA, the International Association of Campus Law Enforcement Administrators, which is an I for international, and it really does put you in touch with those folks in higher ed. The IACP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and then don't forget your regional associations. In Maryland, we call that ACLEA. We leave the I out. It's the Chesapeake region. Virginia has one, California has one. So look regionally for you vendors. If you're looking to reach out and make those contacts, that's where you go. If you're in higher ed, public safety, find out if there's a regional or state level association to belong to. And that's a place to go to then network with your peers at the regional local level. All right, and next slide. And this is getting to the end here. It's all about the impact on daily operations of the institution. It's about keeping that availability and services running smoothly and integrating the siloed tools. And by that, I mean your separate entities that Chief Monroe mentioned, the different applications, and being able to integrate those into one system. That's really the best way to go. The last slide, if you would, that's just my contact information. And I've already made clear you're welcome to share this PowerPoint with whoever would like to have it. But that kind of wraps it up for me at higher ed, just to kind of give you a very quick snapshot of an overall look at higher education institutions as a whole.
All right, thank you very much, Bob. Thank you again, David. So we have a couple of questions here. And again, if anybody does have questions, just click that Q&A button. But you mentioned your interaction with the IT department, given the networking of access control and other solutions. How does that work? How do you avoid the siloing problem between physical and IT?
I think the best example I saw was at the University of North Dakota, where they actually formed a collaborative team and met every quarter. Actually, might have been every month by last I talked to them, where literally physical security, university police, lab safety folks, or environmental health and safety, and IT would meet monthly, have regular standing meetings to share information and kind of get an overall situational awareness about what security issues were impacting the institution. That's probably the best model to use, is to try to reach out and form that collaborative team.
Right. All right. And we've had multiple questions from people who want access to the slides today. So yes, we'll be happy to provide those. I know there's a lot of great information and hard to take notes on the fly. So we definitely will be providing those to attendees. And one more question before we go. So Chief Monroe talked a bit about his interactions with integrators and others and building relationships. In your experience, what's the best way for integrators, for other security companies to work with people in your position?
That's tough. Probably the best thing to do is kind of what Chief Monroe gave as an example, right? Meeting at a conference and having that one-on-one interaction. One of the issues I get a lot of cold calls, and I get overloaded with information from vendors, and I get it. You're competing in the same market space, and I totally understand that. But me as a layman making comparisons of one system to the next, my institution may have just invested in one system and we're not ready to make any kind of a switch. That becomes very hard. But I think going to those conferences, reaching out to the regional organizations is probably the best way to make those contacts.
Great. Thank you very much, Bob. Really appreciate you taking the time. And thank you, David. Great information from CISA as well. And I think our next panelists are all available. So again, appreciate the help, guys. And thanks for the information.
Thank you.
All right. So next up, we have our security solutions panel. And moderating that session will be my colleague, Cameron Walker-Miller. He is Associate Director of Standards and Technology here at SIA. So Cam, I will hand the reins to you. Can you hear me okay? Can you hear me, Cam?
I can hear you.
Can Cam hear me?
I can hear everybody.
Okay, great. All right.
Good. Okay.
All right. It's your show for the next 40 minutes, and have a great session, guys.
How about sound test for me? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep, gotcha, Sean.
Perfect.
Yep, I can hear everyone. Okay, so good afternoon. I'm Cameron Walker-Miller from SIA, and today we're delving deeper into the world of physical security in higher education. And I'm thrilled to be joined by three incredible experts in the field. And I'd like them each introduce themselves. Tim Garrett from Talkaphone. Hey, Tim.
Appreciate that. Thanks for the introduction. I'll say good afternoon, good morning. I'm sure that we've got people attending from all areas. As Cameron mentioned, my name is Tim Garrett. I'm the Regional Sales Manager for Talkaphone. I come to the industry with about 25 years in security, of which I've worked in several different aspects of that security, both on the integration side and on the sales side. I also have what I'll say is a first responder background. So I've been affiliated with the local fire service for the last 20 years. I'll say a little bit of stint before that was a short stint of about 3 or 4 years in the law enforcement. I'll say pretty extensive background in the higher education and other vertical markets. And I'll say look forward to today's discussion as it relates to higher education. Thank you.
Thanks, Tim. Next, James Marcella from Access Communications.
Thanks, Cam. Thanks to everyone for taking the time today. I work at Axis. I'm the director of industry associations. So I get directly involved with different associations in our industry on standards and guidelines work, advocacy, and education. I was also one of the founding members of the Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, and have continued to contribute to that guideline, which is really geared towards K through 12, but there's actually quite a bit of that pertains to higher ed as well. But my area of expertise is on the video surveillance side, and I look forward to discussing that in the higher ed environment today.
Thank you. And last but not least, Sean Ahrens.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. My name is Sean Ahrens. I'm practice leader for Affiliated Engineers, a large mechanical, electrical, plumbing firm, which provides thought leadership and expertise to higher education, as well as multiple other verticals. Glad to be here.
Thanks, everybody. So we all know that higher education campuses are known for the warm and inclusive environments, catering not just to students and administrators and faculty, but to scores of prospective students, like the chief said, at UK, the third largest city in the state of Kentucky, when everything's up and running. So beyond those people, they're the faculty and the scores of prospective students and their families and service providers and contractors and attendees of academic, cultural, and of course, all of the sporting events that happen on campuses. It's a diverse community and the ongoing challenges to ensure everyone's safety. So as Bob mentioned as well, as campuses grow, we witness the challenges that they face, including property damage, theft, assaults, and even incidents involving weapons. The challenges underscore the importance of proactive solutions, which is precisely what we'll be exploring today. So our focus will be on how campuses implement compartmentalization strategies to intelligently divide campus environments into different sections with controlled access points, making this smart approach, keeping security breaches contained to the limited section where they are and unauthorized individuals away from restricted areas. Moreover, in the case of serious threats, such as active shooter situations, rest assured dedicated teams are prepared with lockdown procedures to secure buildings and ensure everyone's safety until the situation is resolved. But our industry commitment doesn't end with just security alone. We also prioritize the user experience of students, staff, and all of the visitors on campus every day. That's why we're dedicated to highlighting user-friendly access control and visitor management systems that offer efficient screening processes and clear communication even during emergencies, to foster comfortable and secure environments for all. So beyond safety, campus security significantly impacts marketing and how institutions are perceived. So we all know the university market is competitive, and parents and prospective students seek reassurance that safety is a top priority. And by promoting robust security measures, parents' confidence of prospective students is instilled, while the institution's image of safety and security is also enhanced, ultimately attracting new students. So let's delve deeper into these crucial topics together, and we'll explore how to maintain a welcoming and secure environment while addressing security challenges head on. So let's begin with Sean, who can tell us more about access control systems and their various types.
So higher education, certainly anybody that is in higher education recognizes the push towards mobile credentials. We're seeing significant impetus on mobile credentials in higher education, not just from the simplicity and the convenience of the mobile credential, but driving forth some of the ROI that previously wasn't present. So this could extend into dorms. You know, when I was going to school, I had a brass key. Now, if you don't pay your rent or you don't pay your school, they basically turn off your access to your dorm room. That extends into your payment services, your library card, and what have you. So there's a certain urgency around schools in embodying that opportunity for access and convenience. However, you know, we still are looking at compartmentalization, where there's R&D elements that are going on in higher education that require additional levels of compartmentalization. integration into biometrics, and bringing this into a situational platform that public safety and other people can rely on to attribute access, monitor access, and investigate incidences as they unfold. So access definitely has a place in the future for higher education. It's not just lockdown, it's more robust. We're looking at return on investment and supporting convenience of the patrons, as well as giving the assurances to parents that their children are going to be safe while at their university.
Thanks, Sean. Tim, can we have some insight on integrating access control with the emergency phones?
Yeah, certainly. So I just, to Sean's point about the, the campus environments and, the robustness of the access control solution, the emergency communication aspect can certainly be part of that unified solution, right? So we utilize these emergency phones to also be I'll say an activation point, utilizing the the inputs and output relays that are associated with emergency phones to trigger other devices. And those devices are typically, something along the lines of some sort of access control points. Those access control points could be rule-based. So what happens when somebody presses a call activation that triggers an access point to have a rule that may be as simple as providing an additional blue light strobe in a PSAP or in a campus environment for an additional awareness. Those could also be addressed more along the lines, as we know, a lot of times video and access, communications are working together, right? Our video streams and stuff are interacting with our access control, and so can the audio portion of that, right? So the audio portion of our emergency communications could certainly be part of that, access control environment or that specific rule base for those type of applications. So that's kind of where the emergency communication phones that already have, to like Sean's point, that return on investment, those have been deployed for several years. So it's almost like repurposing some of that information or some of those deployments into other aspects of our access control or video platforms.
Excellent. Yeah, it was. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, thank you. James, can you tell us about the importance of access control, on campus environments?
I think a lot of it was covered already, but one of the things that we haven't talked about that I think is important from a campus environment perspective is the ongoing maintenance of these access control systems and what we need to do there. And I really like what Sean said, this trend of moving towards mobile credentialing. Obviously, that is the future. It's not necessarily widespread today, but it's certainly the direction it's going in. And from a ongoing maintenance perspective, one of the biggest issues with particularly card access systems, right, where you're issued a card or some other device that gets you into these secured areas, those are easy to lose. You'd be hard pressed to find a college student. Yeah, we do lose our phones once in a while, right? But they hold on to those things pretty dearly. So mobile credentials become that much, I think, easier from an ongoing maintenance perspective. Obviously, there are concerns around how those are implemented. They're much more secure today than they have been in the past, and security of those devices only increases. And it also implements in a lot of cases a biometric aspect of it too. I can't just use anybody's phone like I can use just anybody's access control card. So access control to me is from a school environment perspective, whether it's higher ed or K through 12 or any of the other environments that you might be in from an education perspective, is absolutely critical and is where people should be spending their money first. Controlling who's going in and out of your buildings, going into these sensitive areas is really, and having an audit log, frankly, of who did is probably what you should be looking at first. If you had $1 to spend, you should start there. You should make sure that you can ensure who is in the buildings, out of the buildings, and ensuring that only credentialed, relevant folks who have the right clearance are able to get into these environments.
Thanks, James. And then let's continue with you so we can talk more about video surveillance systems within these universities and different institutions of higher education. Can you tell us more about maybe a use case scenario or campus environment that uses video surveillance in a great way?
Sure. And I'm obligated to say that, this is the second place you want to start spending your money when it comes to now, obviously doing a proper threat and vulnerability assessment will tell you where you need to spend your money on things. But let's talk about video. Video is absolutely all over college campuses and certainly is, widely deployed in K through 12 as well. The campus environment, though, I think the gentleman from Montgomery College did a really great job of explaining sort of the challenges associated with the campus environment and the specific issues in higher ed. But you're really talking about cross-functional, multi-use public access spaces where students and really community members can easily blend with each other. And as a result, both positive and negative aspects of the community easily spill over onto college campuses and universities across the United States. And when you start looking at video surveillance and why we deploy cameras, there's really 4 general use cases for video. One of them is actual surveillance, which I'd argue that most colleges and universities aren't doing. That's where you actually have somebody watching the cameras real time. No one has budget for that typically. What we do see is people doing assessment. An assessment would be you get a call on the radio that says something is happening. There's something going on at a particular place. I can leverage cameras to get a remote view of what's happening there and assess the situation and determine whether I need to do anything else. Forensic use cases include after the fact. I want to determine what happened, who, what, when, where, that type of thing. And finally, risk mitigation, which we'll talk about, where this is really getting into proactive risk mitigation through the use of analytics to proactively alert you and hopefully get you to a point where you can mitigate risks live as they're unfolding. So common use cases in higher ed, obviously facility security. You see cameras at entrances and exits of dorms, academic buildings, stadiums is another area, sporting fields, open spaces, so parking lots, pedestrian walkways, perimeter. Again, oftentimes perimeters can't be defined in a university environment. They just blend right in with the community, but you can still treat those areas as your perimeter through proactive video monitoring. And then I'll just touch base really quickly on some forward-thinking use cases. I know Sean is going to get into a little bit more on analytics, I think, but some forward-looking things that you can do. Aggression analytics through audio, at the edge, at the camera level, right? We're starting to see some colleges and universities get into body-worn camera implementations for their law enforcement on campus. That comes with some privacy issues, and we'll talk about privacy a little bit later. Deterrence through active audio messaging. So, having, if an event happens, a speaker plays a pre-recorded response to let people know that, hey, this is being observed. You might want to move on. And the last thing I want to talk about is operational efficiency. A lot of times, some of these products, cameras are deployed in areas that can be used with business analytics. So why not work with other departments within the university, maybe spread out some budget across multiple departments to do things like queue management in the dining commons, for instance, visitor management or occupancy detection. These are all things that can be used for the business of education versus safety and security.
Great. Thanks for that insight. Tim, I know the chief talked about UK getting new repurposing blue light systems. Can you tell us more about expanding video across campuses?
Yeah, for sure. And I'm just going to, kind of touch on a couple of things that I think were very important that James brought up, as it relates to campus, kind of blending in on that perimeters or, those other areas. Blue light emergency phones, as we know today, are a fantastic resource for expanding that surveillance coverage in areas that are really hard to, explore, those expansion efforts. And what I mean by that is, traditionally speaking, we're accustomed to, a lot of our video surveillance is either in building, entrance points, common areas, on the building itself. Repurposing to that point, as UK just meant, as UK mentioned earlier, repurposing to the point of utilizing these, 9-foot stanchions with the abilities to add additional, camera type, hardware is a really great place for that expansion, right? So we mentioned some things about the analytics side of things. So now when we're talking about, whether those are like crowd controls, we're utilizing or wanting to leverage something with loitering, speakers that are related to not only the emergency phone, but also embedded into the cameras themselves, right? So triggering a emergency activation that can then play that pre-recorded message back to that VMS platform is highly impactful. The other side of that is, I'll just say from an infrastructure challenge, typically we don't have the means of getting these, these camera surveillance devices out to these areas. And what better way to explore repurpose, as we learned about a little earlier, in the emergency tower section. And I mean that because we have traditionally 120 volts that are under these. That's just kind of the most common power that are out to these devices. So we already have the means of being able to provide, the resources needed for our network connectivity or our media converters, adding things to, our multi-sensor cameras and our analytics, and really providing a different experience, I'll say, with the emergency phone aspects.
Thank you. And James mentioned earlier, Sean, based analytics. Can you tell us more about some analytics interests?
So I think analytics, we're a little bit bleeding edge. We're still a little bleeding edge on analytics, but there are some use cases that are emerging. I was working with one university and they were able to leverage license plate recognition to the benefit to resolve a unfolding incident. Essentially, we had a domestic issue unfolding. It was reported that a boyfriend was coming to the site. He was a student. He was an aggressor against his girlfriend. We didn't know where the girlfriend was. We didn't know where he was. And we used LPR to basically ascertain where he was coming in on the campus and to further identify where she was in the campus and get security and public safety to, orientate and respond to an incident with that foreknowledge. And I think that's a powerful use case, right? I think there's some other opportunities for use cases. We should go beyond analytics from a security standpoint. These systems are expensive. I think Tim brought up a great point. Many universities are just scrapping infrastructure that they put in place that limits their ability to expand or build on. Predominantly, when I'm looking for cameras and leveraging analytics, we want those off the building. We want those in the campus. We want those in the commons areas and what have you to support not only investigations. So leveraging the call boxes that we have for other uses in the future to not only provide for emergency, recognize it's not used that much anymore, but still is the possibility. Moreover, the opportunity for leveraging that, campus app, that, that convenience factor, my car won't start. How do I get from this point to that point? These are all really good opportunities to drive additional support for these universities. But I cannot stress enough that, we're still kind of bleeding edge with still opportunities for analytics as they emerge. There are going to be pros and cons to each. But we should look at other opportunities to benefit other aspects of our organization. So for instance, what else could we do with analytics at the cameras? We could identify, people movement, where people are going to and from. Are they accessing a store more frequently? Feeding that information back into campus planning. These are all other opportunities to drive additional ROI, support cross-functional use of these systems, not necessarily just dedicated to security and resilience. And I think as we look at more opportunities for analytics, some of these other use cases will emerge, not only just from security, but to, again, show that value, not only to support a security incident, but other features and opportunities to benefit the university and the university life.
Excellent. So our next topic is emergency communication in higher education. Tim, can you tell us more about radio, analog, cellular, and IP, mass notification?
For sure. Yeah. So, we've come a long way in the technology world related to emergency, communication. I'll start off, back in the early 90s, a Gene Cleary Act was introduced, and we'll just know it for today as the Cleary Act. It really was implemented into campus safety and security, as well as it is to government assistance and statistic reporting, where blue light emergency phones really became, I'll say, dominant in that market. And I'll even go as further to say, iconic. You really can't go to a university or a higher education facility without seeing that. And that kind of started what I'll say is back more on the two-way radio communication. Call stations were connected to a Motorola or a Kenwood style two-way communication that was more of a direct connection with the public safety or campus police. And then over time, that technology either changed hands from Motorola or Kenwood, or really not being evolved, and it went into more of the analog solution. And that analog solution was a very large and very dominant in the higher education space, and really one that was hard to, I'll say, move into the next phase, which is their voice over IP. And before we jump into that, a lot of the higher education space had spent a significant amount of money on implementing a phone system, not just to support the emergency phones, but also to support the entire campus that was traditionally on an analog basis. So when you're having to support, the next technology or migrating into an IP product, you're also implementing a very large infrastructure, commitment on changing that technology into an IP platform. And so over that, course of time, we've started to see, a significant increase in our IP phones. Those IP phones, are what we could say today is SIP compliant. Those SIP compliant devices are being registered with the campus, phone systems. A lot of times we, hear our phone systems to be a provider of Cisco or Avaya, Mitel. And that's that, more of that direct integration, right? Or working directly with like a Cisco call manager, having the ability for our network admins to support those IP phones. They know when those phones have, connectivity issues. They can set things up with like what we'll call hunt groups for those call activations to route to certain places, whether that's public safety, campus police, or even in some instances, that 911 response cannot be answered from a higher education facility. That has to go outside to a police department that then gets routed back to that campus environment for that activation. The other side of the communication is we certainly see cellular as an aspect of that, or what we'll say is cellular routers. Depending on challenges as we may relate to new infrastructure where they're wanting to deploy these new types of emergency devices, but don't necessarily want to put in the network connectivity to get there. So they're utilizing cellular connectivity to get back to the network, utilizing some sort of VPN connection, encrypted, so that they have that cybersecurity in mind as well from that perspective. And then lastly, I'll just mention, a little bit about the, public address. I think public address is a massive point and a huge, component to emergency communications. So we talked about, the app alerts and the other things, IP overhead speakers or paging systems, fire alarm, voice evac, that works inside of the building, right? And it allows our visitors and students and staff to know, but we don't necessarily have a great way of, providing that message to the general public or to our students walking in between classes. And these emergency towers, addressed with a public address solution, provide that means of communication for an assailant. It can be as simple as a weather event we've got inclement weather that's coming in there. We want students to seek shelter in a specific location. And those are simultaneous, meaning that it's leveraging a mass notification platform to multicast that information out at the same time in the same way at all of those locations, so that everybody is aware of the notification.
Sounds good. And piggybacking on that mass communication, Sean, can you give us some insight on coordinating with emergency responders?
Yeah, I think we saw recently with one of the universities dealing with an emergency, what the absolute importance of communication systems are. And the opportunity for P25 and interoperability is certainly present. I think what has happened is that there have been environmental changes. So for instance, in radio frequency, we had this refarming aspect where we reclaimed 900 megahertz. We moved that to public safety. Now we're doing digital trunking. And our old radios back in the day were just high powered radios, 4, 8 watt radios that just would punch through anything. And now under this, digital framework, we see, these signals are extremely fragile and they can't penetrate into the buildings. And so really, as we look at higher education or any environment for that case, we really need to ensure that we have communication, not only from individuals inside the building that are going to call via cellular, but also for officers responding or first responders that are going to be in the building for coordinating efforts, because some of these buildings do not propagate radio very well. So distributed antenna systems have come into play now because we recognize, hey, we just, we changed the environment. This is the radio environment that we're in now, and we can't penetrate buildings that we used to be able to. So I think that, as we think about this in the future, and I would highlight my article, I did, call boxes in a mobile age. And, just a real anecdotal story. Here I am walking around a university and they're doing a tour and we're looking at the call boxes and they're describing on how the call box works and it's so wonderful and everything. And as the tour continued on, we were on another side of campus and I no longer recognized any call boxes, and the tour guide said, well, it's, we're moving towards this mobile app, and the mobile app is absolutely awesome and it's great and it's tremendous. And this is, all the beautiful things, and we don't need these call boxes anymore. And I looked down at my phone on a Verizon network and I had no bars. So, communication's only going to work if we have the ability to sustain a medium to get from point A to point B. So that requires not only cellular infrastructure, but looking at other individual carriers such as Verizon, AT&T, prominent carriers in that area. Higher education cannot rely on the fact that students are going to have charged phones all the time. They're on their phones 24/7, and many times the batteries are just completely dead, especially late at night when they're walking from a lab or going back to their apartment or what have you. And there is the biggest opportunity for them to be assaulted or accosted. So we have to recognize, and we have to build around communication. We have to understand those factors to support our staff as well as the students come into the environment so they can get the help that they need in any radio environment.
Cam, I just want to jump in here real quick.
Yep.
When it comes to
calling.
when it comes to emergency communications, right, there's standards-based codified definitions for that. And cell phones do not fall into that category. Cell phones fall into the category of routine communications, and they can be used for notifications and things of that matter, but they can't be used as a primary means. So Sean is absolutely right when he's talking about that. And if people want to learn more about that, just look at NFPA 72 and NFPA 101, which life safety code didn't even add Ethernet until 2017, for God's sakes. And there's still AHJs out there today who are only, looking at 2012 or earlier versions of those. So that's another. Code and compliance is a big aspect when it comes to emergency communications, and they never keep up with technology. So you can always do more with the latest and greatest stuff, but if your AHJ is not going to permit it, you really got to look into that, I guess. Is I just want to make sure that that's out there as well. It looks like Sean's going to jump in on this too.
I'm actually, it's a complementary thought. It's right along with your exact, what you're talking about, not cellular, but the move to elimination of desk phones. So from forever and ever, we go to a desk phone, we dial 911 and there's assistance on the line. Then we went to VoIP and we had, PBXs that were going to the wrong address. And there have been environmental changes that affect an emergency response over a period of time, but nothing as significant as what is occurring right now, where people are moving away from desk phones. Your home phone, no longer. People are getting rid of their home phones or using cellular phones. But in an office or a school environment, there are going to be less and less desk phones. So we need to establish other means to facilitate a communication in the event they don't have their cell phone, like in an armed assailant event, right? In an armed assailant event, they leave their office or they're in the restroom, they hear some popping sounds or some screaming, they're running away, they don't necessarily have their phone, but they still need to communicate what is going on to someone. So we need to facilitate an opportunity. Is that going to be call boxes? Is that going to be are we going to put phones in some strategic places so people can use the traditional 911? Or are you going to run over to your computer, boot up the laptop, jump on, log in, jump into your thing, open up your mobile, or not your mobile, but your virtual keypad and dial 911?
So training. How do people train? What is a strategy for training for those scenarios to bypass those new methods of communication today?
There is absolutely no better training or opportunity to improve on your program than conducting tabletop and live action exercises. Absolutely. And when you do those exercises, you want to make sure you've got scribes that can basically identify what's going on at particular areas. It could be administration. Administration's got to deal with the crisis. We want to scribe there. We want to scribe with the person in the control center. We want to scribe with people in the field. We want to be able to document and do an after action report to really understand where are our gaps? Where do we need to shore things up? Items such as I just suggested. How do we dial 911? What do we do if we need to have communication with other responding agencies? Does P25 even work? Does our interoperable radio system actually work? And we're finding in some instances, it doesn't. I've had a number of clients that have worked with an interoperable system, not going to mention any names, but it doesn't work. It says on paper it works, but when it comes down to an actual emergency, they're recognizing challenges. So there is no better way to really facilitate your training, to get in front of the gaps, than to actually test the program and start it off in stages. Maybe you work your way up in some mock events, move it up to a tabletop to a live action, involve other participants so you can understand how they would respond and really shore your program up. Let's learn, let's make the mistakes so we can learn from them, so we don't make it when it really matters.
Just like fire drills.
Yeah, I want to add a little bit to that as well, Cam.
Sure.
One of the gaps that I consistently see happening in these tabletop exercises or live action drills is the idea that they're not including their technology in those drills. And we see it time and time again where an emergency happens and you can't find anyone who understands how to work the video surveillance system or lock down the school from access control perspective. If you're not incorporating technology, this technology you've spent a lot of money on, If you're not incorporating that into your exercises, you're not going to use it on your worst day. The day that something happens, you're not going to have the people there that know what's going on. And the other aspect of it is to follow incident command structure. So FEMA, National Incident Management System, you should be mirroring the ICS roles within your organization so that when first responders show up on scene, they have the counterparts within your organization to interface with those counterparts. And you need backups for those people. And all of them need to know inside and out their roles and responsibilities when the worst day happens, so that you are leveraging and using your technology. A great example of how to use video surveillance in emergency, if you look at NFPA 3000, which is an active shooter hostile event response standard, right? They define different types of zones. So you have hot, warm, and cold zones. And they correspond to each of those zones, the type of training and people who are allowed to go in them. So for instance, a hot zone, if you're a first responder, like on the EMS side or fire, you're not allowed into a hot zone, period. That's only law enforcement. Warm zones, you're allowed to go in there with armed escorts from law enforcement. So a cold zone, obviously you can go in there, but there could be victims in an area that is designated a hot or a warm zone, and you can't go in there to help them because you don't have the right credentials or you don't have the right people to access them. Whereas you might be able to clear areas a lot faster just by having someone sitting at the video, VMS, looking at what's going on and liaising with law enforcement. Time and time again, we read the after action reports where they just didn't use the technology properly, or they used it in worst cases incorrectly, where they're viewing recordings of things and they're thinking somebody, worst case scenario, active shooter is still on site because they're looking at a recording and they think it's live. And that has happened in more than one occasions. But including technology in your training, your tabletops, absolutely vital, often overlooked.
So that brings us to our last topic of the integration of access control, video surveillance, and emergency communication all into one non-siloed group. So that, I know presenters before spoke about silos, and that topic there in the training, and people may not be fully aware of how the different tools and technology works. As a panel, feel free to chime in, whoever. What's a good way to improve situational awareness in achieving integrated systems at a university?
So I think surveillance, absolutely, situational awareness for an active or evolving incident, and using surveillance and feeding that back to your crisis management group is supportive. I think from law enforcement, if law enforcement knows that it's a tool that they can use, is also extremely important. With regards to communication, this is the biggest gap that I find in all the after actions I review. It's communication. Some breakdown in communication at some point. Somebody walked into the building because they didn't know there was an unfolding incident. Security or police weren't able to communicate because there was radio interoperability. People weren't able to identify because there was cellular interoperability. You get too many people on a cell line and you have no cell coverage, right? So myself, after 9/11, I was in a building, we experienced an earthquake. It took one person to say, it's happening again. And everybody basically self-evacuated into the staircase. It was just a matter of peer pressure. And I was amazed after 9/11, after all that, I saw people trying to post things and trying to open up their phone. And rather than worry about the egress out to the street, which wasn't the right thing to do because of the self-evacuation, but they were still trying to use their cell phones, and no one could use their cell phones because the system was completely overloaded. So we need to take those things into account. Then the last aspect is there's a big discussion about mass notification and emergency communication systems. And many universities have this ad hoc approach of addressing emergency communications. And I would submit your biggest opportunity is to unify your emergency communications. And when I mean unification, I mean being able to drive pre-canned messages over radio, over police radio, police or public safety radio, being able to drive communication over the radio station at the campus, the TV monitors, the overhead monitors, the screens that come into the thing, the SMS communication, the big voice communication. All of that should be unified so that someone can sit from a desk and type or speak or what have you and communicate across all of these mediums simultaneously. Being able to open up a different app and load this and type it over and over and over not only takes away from the operator and their ability to take in other calls that could feed information into responding and resolving that incident, but it's just a waste of time. And time is so precious during these crisis things. And this communication can be unified. You just need to find the right integrator. You got to find the right technologies. And I would submit as probably the biggest opportunity to really support an emergency and respond to it without the loss of life. The faster we can do it, it's all based on communication.
And just a quick add to that, Sean's point in that unified communication, specifically in the industry that I serve from emergency standpoint, I would say that in the higher education space, they have these resources available. They're utilizing them today. They're utilizing the mass notification. They're utilizing emergencies. They're utilizing these high, VMS platforms and access control, but they're using them potentially ineffectively, and they're not utilizing as a unified system to be able to provide that means of communication, as Sean mentioned, quickly and efficiently. As time matters, as a first responder, I know how information gets distorted as we go. We talked about radio frequencies and some of that other stuff that can't penetrate buildings with. I've seen it firsthand. I've witnessed it. You walk somewhere, you go in someplace and you lose all communications. But we have to look at that, we have to look at those, those guidelines. We have to train on that, as Sean mentioned earlier. We have to expect for some of these things that are going to happen and be ready for those. And I think that all comes back to that unified approach.
And I concur with my esteemed colleagues here on this one. Pick your partnerships. Work with companies that you trust and who know what they're doing. That's the way to get integration done right.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for a few questions for each of you. So James, I know there's a question in the chat about privacy. Want to take a question? Are there any? There's a question. Are any of the panelists familiar with campuses that are usually using facial recognition systems? And is there a concern with privacy for FERPA on an open campus?
Most definitely. I can't name any universities off the top of my head who I know are using facial recognition or that I'd be permitted to talk about anyway. But it's a interesting and sticky topic right now, and there is absolutely privacy concerns around the use of facial recognition. I can tell the audience that at a federal and state level, facial recognition bans and legislation are actually reversing trend. The trend used to be, facial recognition is bad. We don't want it. Get rid of it. Most of the municipalities and or states, who implemented these bans have since reversed them. There's still some bans in certain areas, but the trend has been on the legislative front to reverse them. That said, there absolutely still is a very large privacy concern around that, and particularly in environments where you're sending off your children who are off on their own really for their first time. So there's a number of aspects around privacy at the campus and university level that don't necessarily apply to day-to-day public life. And I think it's a individual decision from a campus perspective. I'm not aware of any state or federal mandates that talk about limiting the use of facial recognition at the college level. But it certainly is something that I think over time we'll start to see more use of, particularly when we talked about the idea of communities bordering colleges and universities and how you don't necessarily always have a defined perimeter, Sean brought up a great example of using LPR. So they use that to figure out, okay, how did this person gain access to the campus? With roads going right through the middle of campuses sometimes and things, that's a prime example of how you can use a technology to help find people of interest who you need to find. Facial recognition could be a factor there as well, but it has to be done in complete transparency, highly regulated from an ethics perspective. And I think at the campus level, you'll see that more so than you'll see anywhere else in our society.
Guys, sorry, but I think we'll have to end there. I was very hesitant to cut off the conversation because so much great information and expertise, but we are running a few minutes long, so I'll have to jump in and thank you for your participation and taking the time to share all these great insights.
Thank you.
A pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Have a great day.
All right, so next up, we'll be looking at some hard data on security technology use by colleges and universities. Neil Jenkins is a principal consultant at Omdia. He supports custom research and consulting projects across this physical security, critical communications, safe cities, and smart building markets. Neil joined Omdia, then known as IMS Research, in 2007 and has published reports on video surveillance equipment, physical security services, smart home, and embedded vision. He was also responsible for the physical security team's end user research portfolio and has delivered custom research and consultancy ranging from key market analysis to M&A due diligence. And I'll add that Neil has written multiple great reports for us here at SIA, working on another one now, in fact, and is here to talk a little bit about one that he did for us recently on the higher education market. So Neil, always great to see you, and thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Ron. Let me just see if I can share my screen. Hopefully this works. Is that sharing?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ron. I appreciate the introduction. And good afternoon to everybody. So as Ron said, my name is Neil Jenkins. I'm a consultant at Omdia. I cover, broadly speaking, the physical security and building technology research areas. So lots of relevant content for today. And I'm going to present some data and insight on the higher education market from a paper that we collaborated with SIA on a little while back. It's one of many. We've released a number of article reports, and I believe they're available to SIA members on the webpage. I can point you towards that if you're interested in getting access to some of the data. So just a very quick introduction to Omdia. So Omdia is part of Informa Tech, which is part of Informa. Informa is a UK-based publicly traded company, primarily focused on events. Informa Tech is the technology-focused division, and Omdia is the research brand. We cover everything from consumer electronics and semiconductors through to service provider, physical security and building tech, as I mentioned, manufacturing technology. So we have a wide kind of perspective on the technology industry and the impacts of the technology industry. So that's really our focus. And again, we're involved in things like events and media and training, and then in core research and consultancy. A relatively new brand. I think Ron mentioned in the introduction, IHS Markit, that was the previous organization that I was involved with. Omdia is essentially a collaboration of a number of different acquisitions. But I guess the key point is that is the research brand. So in terms of data, Omdia does a lot of market sizing and forecasting and competitive analysis. The data point on the slide here is actually from one of our combination reports called the Total Security Report. And what it does is it brings together research from lots of different analysts that cover the physical security space. So you can see down the right-hand side some of the markets that are included in this data point. So video surveillance equipment, we're looking at cameras and recorders, software. Access control, looking at the control panels and the readers and the credentials. On the intruder alarm side, looking at panels and sensors. Entrance control, both from the vehicle perspective and the pedestrian perspective. Those are the larger market segments covered in this data point. But it also includes consumer video, which is video cameras that are sold through consumer means, typically DIY installed, sold through the retail channel. Mobile video surveillance, so cameras that might be on police cars, that might be on mass transit, might be on school buses. Body-worn cameras and the associated digital evidence management systems, and then finally the automatic number plate recognition cameras. So there's a lot of different markets included in this data point. For full transparency, this is focused on the Americas market, not the US market, and that differs from some of the data that I'll present in the following slides. The key point I wanted to make was across all of these different segments, the education market is a significant revenue generator. It accounted for 7% of that total physical security and entrance control equipment market. So it's an important segment of the overall physical security space. Moving on to some more specific data on the education space. So the chart here actually presents 3 of those equipment markets that I mentioned. So it only looks at video surveillance, access control, and intruder equipment. It is for the US market, as opposed to the Americas on the previous slide. So this is for the US market only, and it is for the education vertical only. And our estimate is that the market was worth around about $1 billion in 2022 for all those 3 different equipment segments. And furthermore, our education, our higher education estimate was for around 43% of that total number. So obviously, the definitions are I think we're pretty much industry standard for those definitions. You know, K through 12 being everything from kindergarten through to year 12. Higher education being universities and colleges, and both public and private. But the fundamental point again to make is that higher education is an important segment of that education total spend. I think there are over 6,000 institutions that provide secondary education in the US. So it's an important segment of education, which is an important segment of the overall physical security space in terms of revenues. At this point, it's also probably helpful for me to talk a little bit around how we build markets up. So Omdia uses an approach which we refer to as bottoms up. But what that really means is that our analysts covering all of these different equipment service markets try and identify every single company that is active in a market. And then we try and have interviews, discussions, collect questionnaires from all of those different companies and build the market up by making an estimate for each and every one of those. Obviously, some of them will be estimates. We have to obviously take into account that there are sometimes quite long tails in certain markets of relatively small vendors. But fundamentally, what we're trying to do is build a market up by making an estimate for each of the equipment vendors and software vendors that sell into a particular segment. We then further segment those estimates into regions, into product types to drive our data points. And similar here from verticals. So that is the basis of how the analysis is built, if you like. We will typically test that with a tops-down approach to sense check it, but fundamentally the data is built by speaking with the vendors, speaking with the software providers, and making estimates for each of their individual revenues within those different product categories. There's a couple of benefits of that. One, you can justify and understand, gaps between the tops down and the bottoms up, and you can understand why that might have happened. The other benefit is that you can actually do some very interesting competitive work. So you may have seen from Omdia market share estimates of leading video surveillance vendors, for example, or access control vendors. So that methodology does generate that type of output. So jumping to the second data point, specifically on the higher education market, as I was mentioning, the different analyst teams building up these data points, one of the benefits of doing that is that you do actually have product level revenue estimates. And you can see here, again, for the US market, but this time specifically for higher education, our estimates for how the market splits between video surveillance, access control, and intruder alarms. I think our total estimate for 2022 for all products combined was $417 million. And video surveillance is the largest segment of that total addressable market. So moving on to trends, the benefit, I guess, of the research approach that we take, and certainly for the documents and the 4-page white papers that we collaborate with SIA on, is that we not only pick up market sizing and revenue information, but we also pick up a lot of trend information. So essentially what we do is we kind of amalgamate the industry perspective on different product categories and the key trends that are driving those product categories. And I've just highlighted some of the feedback from dedicated interviews that we did on the higher education market. So starting with video surveillance, one of the key outcomes from the research discussions that we had was this idea that the preventative security solutions are actually very difficult to do without making students feel like they're under surveillance. Obviously, students spend a lot of money, time in campuses, and they don't want to feel like they're constantly under surveillance, but they want to feel like they're safe. So there is a sort of a challenge there between ensuring safety and you know, the campus is a safe environment for the students, but also making sure that they are not feeling like they're being constantly watched. So some trends around that, security cameras that provide an expanded field of view, so things like dual and multi-sensor cameras are increasing in sort of acceptance and gaining market share in the higher education space, because they can basically do that. They can provide that surveillance, but without really kind of encroaching on the students' perception of being surveyed. Another product category that was mentioned regularly was vandal-resistant cameras. Obviously, campuses are pretty big areas. There are quiet areas and there are sort of more populated areas. So having products, cameras that can actually have some robustness to them was another important consideration from the discussions that we had. In terms of the video analytics market, interesting given the previous discussion, the algorithms that were most mentioned to us were things like loitering and virtual tracking and tripwire. Those were the algorithms that were predicted to increase in popularity. We didn't actually hear too much around facial recognition in the research discussions that we had. So that was perhaps something from the previous discussion that would be interesting. Moving on to the access control space. The key point made repeatedly was that the higher education space really is an enterprise level access control solution. It has to manage thousands of students, you know, some cases 60,000, 70,000 in the very large college campuses, and obviously hundreds of staff and significant numbers of visitors that may be on site for very short periods of time as well. So that requires a very enterprise level access control system to kind of manage and keep track of all the different people on site. Another important trend that was mentioned and has been tracked by our access control analyst is the move towards mobile credentials. So mobile credentials is the use of smartphones instead of a kind of traditional badge or ID credential. And the higher education market is actually one of the few verticals where our analyst team actually forecast that mobile credentials will actually replace badges and ID cards in the long run. And there's a couple of reasons why our analyst team feel that way. So firstly, there are such a large number of credentials in the college space, especially certainly in the larger colleges, that it makes sense to try and move to something that is lower cost, to use, you know, smartphones that students already have. Obviously, I think again, there was some challenges mentioned in terms of battery life and when those batteries might be kind of running out of juice, but that is certainly, in comparison to other verticals, there is a real opportunity there. Privacy was another one. The encrypted mobile credential offers more privacy potentially, and equally, you know, the loss of badges can be quite a costly challenge for an access control system to manage. So using smartphones, given the scale of some colleges, can actually be quite a positive approach there as well. Moving on to other security equipment, and again, I think tying in with some of the previous session, we heard quite a bit when we did our discussions around audio systems that can provide direction in the event of an emergency. So solutions that will tell students where to go, where not to go. I think there's also some opportunity for mass notification and video screens as well to do the same, perhaps with maps, perhaps with arrows, but fundamentally to be a bit more smart in terms of the response to alert and to sort of funnel people in a more organized and safer way. Related to that, some of the discussions that we had, that the interviewees were talking quite a bit around these new tracking apps that are on phones, which can be used to manage students and staff in the event of an alert. I think there's also potential to integrate that into the police response as well. So those seem to be emerging technologies that could be used in an alert. So another kind of smart way to sort of funnel people in the right direction and away from the danger. And then I guess less commonly mentioned or less commonly deployed from the discussions we had, but duress solutions are being used in very sort of specific cases. So it could be like a college president, it could be counselors that are working with at-risk students, but some sort of mobile duress or duress solution that allows these people to actually create an alert quickly, not using obviously more traditional means like phones and other sensors. That is another security equipment solution that was referenced to us. So we talked a little bit around the technologies and how that's playing from a product category. Another thing that, or another topic that we focus on when we look at these vertical markets is the broader market drivers and market barriers. And again, summarizing the feedback and opinions of the interviewees and coming from the vendor and systems integration community that we speak with to build these reports. So looking firstly at market drivers, the first one that was identified during our discussions was around physical security as a consideration for students. So students obviously pay a lot to attend a college. It's a big investment in time. They're increasingly making decisions based on the safety of campuses. Obviously, campuses are large areas with lots of people on them. There are threats, whether that's assault, sexual assault, criminal mischief, graffiti, vandalism. There are a lot of different threats. Having a safe campus is increasingly a consideration for students as they make that decision in terms of which college to attend. So that was one topic that was mentioned as a market driver. If you can have a safer campus, if you can provide a solution that makes the campus safer, that can be a positive for the, I guess, getting students to actually choose your college. Another that was mentioned was around access control integration. So a common thread in the discussions was that higher education campuses are essentially mini cities. They have retail, they have dorm rooms, they have education facilities, they have stadiums, they have transportation. And there's a potential to pull together the access control system, the credential for that, to support all of those different applications across a campus. So the same card that provides you access to your dorm, provides access to the education facility, allows you to pay for a meal, allows you to purchase a book, maybe provides access to the sports stadium. So obviously there are challenges to deploying such kind of widespread solutions, but that is one market driver that was identified by the interviewees. And then the final driver on the side of was legislation, which is looking specifically at the Clery Act. So in the US, most colleges have a Clery Act manager who is responsible for managing and disclosing information about crime. In fact, I think it's a requirement if you're in federal financial aid programs. Those Clery Act managers need to publish annual campus security reports, crime logs, crime statistics. So there's a lot of reporting off the back of that. And if the security solution can support that and aid that in any way, then that's going to be a positive market driver for the physical security space. Looking at the barriers, there are obviously some barriers as to all markets. One that was mentioned repeatedly was around relevant case study deployments. So the point here was that very often in the education space, the end user will require case study deployments, and typically they'll want case study deployments that are from a similar sized campus and from a similar location geographically. So it was mentioned repeatedly that systems integrators looking to sell into the higher education space need to be ready with those case studies, and they need to be relevant both from a size and a geography perspective. And that's going to be something to be prepared with prior to trying to sell into the higher education space. Another barrier actually kind of associated with perhaps what we talked about on the driver's side, that a lot of the higher education systems are essentially a patchwork of systems. There are lots of end users, all with different requirements and different system types. And pulling those together and integrating those can be quite difficult because of the number of different decision makers. So that is a challenge in terms of pulling together all the different decision makers and building something that is more campus-wide. Something that actually was identified as something quite different from the K through 12 market, where most of the systems actually covered the entire campus, obviously much smaller campuses. And then the final barrier was budget, probably a barrier for most vertical markets. The key point here was that value was the important consideration. I think budgets are not as tight as they are in K through 12, but fundamentally, the system has to provide value. It has to provide value for money. So those were key barriers that were identified during the research process. So just summarizing the output from the document, and like I say, just to reiterate, the report is available in full on the SIA website for SIA members. But higher education is a complex market. It's more complex than most of the verticals that we assess within Omdia. In the physical security space, it has various decision makers with different security requirements, different budget holders. They want to see solutions that have been deployed. They need relevant case studies, typically with a similar location, with a similar campus size. But that's really kind of the challenge there, is to show things that have worked and to try and pull together some of the different decision makers. There is that opportunity, obviously, to integrate some of these systems. Partially, the benefit would be to bring budgets together to increase the budget size, but also to make the college a more efficient and sort of easier solution from a student perspective. Rather than having lots of credentials, for example, maybe they can have one credential to access all the different daily activities that they need to do. There are obviously challenges in bringing all the different departments together, but fundamentally, there does seem to be some movement towards that type of solution in the higher education space. And then finally, from a technology perspective, again, Omdia tracks lots of different vertical markets. Higher education is, I would say, more accepting of technology than most verticals. Whether that's video analytics, whether that's looking at mobile credentials, as an access control methodology, whether it's looking at some of the mass notification and duress solutions. There does seem to be potential to sell new technology into the higher education space. And with that, I will hand back to Ron.
All right, thanks so much, Neil. Yeah, great information. And yeah, you are correct that the report on the higher education market is available on the SIA website, securityindustry.org. If anybody does have any difficulty finding it, just email me. I'll be happy to help you out with that. Send you a copy. That's rhawkins@securityindustry.org, RHAWKINS at securityindustry.org. It's a really great resource and one of many that Omdia has done for us on various vertical markets. All right, I think we're ready for our next panel. And we'll be looking at an innovative access control case study at the University of Massachusetts, Boston. So we have three panelists with us: Janet Fenner from Sentry Enterprises, Jen Maitino from UMass Boston, and Christopher Colon, also from UMass Boston. So I'll just ask each of you to introduce yourselves. Janet, I guess we can start with you.
Sure, Janet Fenner, Century Enterprises. I'm Chief Marketing Officer. Glad to be here, and thanks so much, Ron.
All right, thank you. And Jen?
Hi, folks. Jen Maitino, Associate Dean and Director of Housing and Residential Life at UMass Boston.
Thank you very much. And Chris, are you able to turn on your video?
I try, but it says that the host has stopped it.
Oh, no. Hold on a second. Sorry to cause trouble for everybody. Let me see if I can fix that.
We're back.
Oh, there we go.
How are you? My name is Christopher Colon. I'm Director of Student Affairs Technology Services over here at UMass Boston. Pleasure to be here.
All right. Thanks so much. Appreciate you all being here, everybody. And thanks for your patience. We're running a few minutes behind. So thanks for waiting us out. But all right. So Jen, let's start with you. So you have this campus, you're facing these access control challenges. Can you tell us a little bit about what the challenges were that you're facing and what kind of solution you found for this?
Sure. So here at UMass Boston, our residence halls have 24/7 security and turnstiles that you need to pass through on the first floor to get into the residential portion of the building. So where the students are residing, similar to a lot of residence halls, where there's a security point there. And again, also like many places, what we have used is our traditional ID badge with a proximity type sensor. Students would tap in, move through our security area into the residential area. And some of the issues that we were noticing, and I certainly hear other colleagues talking about as well, these are traditionally 18 to 22-year-olds, right? And so when they want to do something, they think about ways to do it. So a lot of folks, taking their ID, passing it back to someone. I've certainly been at campuses where they get thrown out the window. So if I don't want to come down to meet my guests at the security desk, I drop my ID out the window, then they just tap in and keep walking. Because usually if your ID opens the gate, folks don't question you. So we knew that was happening. And then also we were seeing some issues with our ID cards. Again, we're not dissimilar from a lot of places, also have students' meal plan information, dining points, or what we call beacon bucks, that students can put money on their cards to use at vending, retail locations. So if you lose your card or someone takes your card, they not only have access to get into the building because it thinks that, the card isn't tied to them in any way other than by name, but also the funds that are on it. So we are having students misplace cards or cards go missing, losing meal swipes because someone picks up their card and can just use it. So I think those were some of the larger things we were looking at, particularly in the residence halls, is how do we enhance security so we truly know it is you that is going through the gate, without having an individual person have to stop every person and ask them to see their ID, all those other things, right? I think we recognize that in a large community, that's just not a practical solution. Folks are coming and going. And so in speaking with Chris and our student affairs technology team, it was sort of like, how do we find something that can mitigate some of these challenges? How do we know for sure if that Jen Maitino is Jen Maitino, or her card is attached to her? And so Chris and his team were able to really come up with a cool solution based on what they were looking at and working with Sentry on some technology that helps, again, attach that card. So my card doesn't just say my name on it. I'm the one who has to be holding it to use it. I can't give it to all my friends to let them all come in, again, which is compromising the security of the entire community. Or if I lose it, right, anyone can pick it up off the floor and get access to 1,100 of our students and their spaces. So again, went to Chris and his team, and he sort of took it from there.
All right, so Chris, let's turn to you. So tell us a little bit more about the solution and what are the specifics of the card to confirm that, that age-old identity question, how do we know you are who you say you are?
Well, to Jen's point, we wanted to find a solution for her passback issue, but we wanted to also find a solution that was in line with what we were presently doing. We've had previous conversations about facial recognition. Us right here at UMass Boston, I didn't feel that we could roll that out in a few months, a few weeks. Not going to happen. I think we found a solution that was in line with what our present construct. The Sentry biometric card is a just like similar to what we have now, which is what we have now is a beacon card. It's an I-class card, but the Sentry biometric is EV2, I believe. And as such, it sort of falls in line with what we're presently doing, where we give the student an ID card. It's registered in Linnell in our access control system. It follows that same similar construct. And the reason why I think it was a great find, a great solution, was because it definitely did. I think it will, because it's a future implementation, but I feel that the Sentry card will mitigate passback. I think other solutions that were possibly on the table didn't do it as well as the Sentry card, because once you register your fingerprint, which is the biometric that goes on the card, that card is tied to you. It cannot be replicated. It cannot be shared. Knowing that we have, like Jen said, the meal plan on the card, we have access to facilities on the card. We also have parking passes on the card. Knowing that there's so much value to this card, we wanted to find a way to properly or better secure the students' information. The beauty also about the card is that their biometric is only stored on the card. It's not in a database. It's not anywhere. It's only stored on the card. So the student's identity remains private, while I think solving the solution, providing the solution of anti-passback at the residence hall. Knowing that a facility like the residence hall is such a, on campus, is such a sensitive facility. I also was able to, with my predecessor, sort of, and also Janet and her team, they've been fantastic. We've been able to sort of find a streamlined process to integrating in other areas, such as health services, the research facilities, and IT rooms. So there's not only a present solution for the residence halls, but also for campus as a whole. So that's why I felt the fact that we already have a beacon card, we're just sort of following that same construct while providing more security now for the student, and hopefully in the future for the campus as a whole.
Ron, I'm going to just, I know you're muted, just really quick while you get your
Yeah,
volume. I'm
please.
going to show the Sentry card real quick so everybody can just take a look at what this card is. It's super thin. It's just like a regular card. And here is where the sensor is, where the student or the community member actually puts their fingerprint on to verify that it's them. It takes less than a half a second for the system to go ahead and read that it is a person in within the Linnell system. They are, and it was agnostic to the readers that they had on campus. They didn't have to replace anything except for replacing the card. And what they were spending already on cards was the same value that they were looking to do with Sentry.
Yeah, so Janet, I wanted to ask you, and Jen and Chris also feel free to jump in. But we've heard a few people today mention mobile credentials. Can you talk about why this was the better solution in this situation?
Well, I know, Chris, I'm going to defer to you on that after I say mobile credentials. You have to be careful because your mobile all your information lives on your phone, and now you're actually giving access to other apps and other entities. You're able to track the student. I know that came up before. You're able to track the student. You have to actually be in line to ask the student, hey, can we put this on your phone? And Chris, I know that you had a bit of pushback on that.
Yes, I think that the report that was presented prior mentioned that the higher education spectrum is a very sensitive space, and it's something that a lot of times you have to pick the solution that's best for your campus uniquely. But in addition to that, if we're talking about mobile credentialing, I just felt that at the time, if we're talking about adding, picking in one line solution, having mobile credential serve for the meal plan, for parking, that's a much heavier lift, in my opinion, than going with the Sentry card and knowing that the Sentry card will serve all of these purposes unilaterally. And I think that's what, for me, that's what you can call a solution, because it's one card, we're still using it's a beacon card. Students are already used to using the card, as opposed to saying, hey, now we're going to switch to biometric and you're going to access all of these applications via, it's a heavier lift for sure. And as of right now, if I wanted to say what was the more viable solution, I went with the Sentry card because I feel that that was the unilateral solution for the campus.
And mobile credentials can still be shared. I mean, Jen spoke about, they were still taking their mobile phones, pitching them out the window for somebody to come in and show their QR code or their mobile credential. So it did not prevent the pass back. So if you take a look at the ROI that the campus is getting back, this Sentry card is going to allow them to not only use it at the residence halls, the residence rooms, the meal plans, the vending machines alone. Just think about the ROI, the 6% that you pay credit card companies, that gets eliminated. Washer, dryers, everything on campus, even securing laptops. This will allow UMass to eventually future-proof their laptops, even their phones. Students will be able to use this credential that now belongs to them, that is locked to them, to secure their phones as well.
Additionally, I think the one aspect that has to be taken into account, it might be an easy process for some, but maybe not for others. If a student loses their phone and they have to get their phone replaced, that for me is a harder process than coming into our office, getting another Sentry card, re-registering your thumbprint, and you're good to go.
And I think from just what we know, certainly about students and what we see with students, time is of the essence, right? They are so busy. They're going in so many directions, which again, I'm like, oh, just wait, my friends. You think you're busy now. But to replace those things and to, again, program that credential, that card, we piloted it with our resident assistants on campus. So they are our student leaders in the residence halls. They are upperclassmen. They are often our harshest critics, right? And they were surprised when we said, okay, we're going to pilot this program. Come down to the office and we're going to program the card. And just again, as Janet sort of described, you're touching your finger on that sensor area and they're like, that's it. That's it. And now you can throw it out in the middle of the street. Anyone can pick it up, but they can't use it. Right. And so I think there was some efficiency there, while again, still providing that level of security that phones, I feel like they're least likely to use because they're attached to them, but they still can share them and they still can lose them.
Correct.
Yeah, I know in a previous conversation, you talked about the state auditor looking at this program.
Yes.
Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. That's a good point, Ron. So I'm currently going through an audit. And as a result of this audit, they were very impressed with the Sentry card and its ability to further secure high priority areas such as the IT closets and research areas. So I think like I said, I think it's a physical device that can also be trackable, easily trackable. Who's going into these rooms? Even though you provide the biometric card, it's still tied, in my opinion, to an easier format where we can do our research in the back end. I can go into Linnell, run a report. It's still tied to the same sort of construct. And when you're talking about facial recognition and gaining access to all of these applications via facial recognition, not saying that it's not possible, but reporting and having clear and concise processes, I think that's a whole other sort of process within itself to find out what really works for the university. Whereas Sentry card just fell right in line with our processes, our procedures, and all we did was just sort of amplify the security on the card while meeting audit requirements.
Yeah. Over time, obviously, security technology changes. How does this fit into potential future security solutions?
I can answer, or should I? I can continue.
You're doing great.
No, well, I think it does. Again, as I said, I feel that it's when you're on a campus, I think there are security technologies that obviously are unilaterally used, but the application of the security technology is what also matters. Technology is only as good as its application. And so looking at our space, looking at our campus, knowing that additionally, I came from parking prior to being here, and knowing that there is also an issue with sharing parking passes. So having these ideas, I know that it is an easier path to further implement this across campus and use this as the card or the identification card of the future. And again, it's up to your scenario and whatever campus you're in. If you are ready to use mobile credentialing as the unilateral platform so for all your applications, sure. But for us, it just made sense to presently use or implement the Sentry card, knowing that its further application is easy. It's an easier process to do so on campus at UMass Boston. Not only on campus at UMass Boston, but I do believe that once we do this at UMass Boston, the other UMasses will be interested in.
And the card will be fully deployed when?
The card, we're looking to fully deploy the card in the residence halls fall 2024.
And I think one thing that, certainly bears mentioning, sort of the elephant in the room, and especially if you talk to folks who are working in higher education, current budget situations, there's all sorts of technology. And like we talk about any sort of technology, I feel like the second it's issued, it's obsolete, right? And so the future applicability of this, while not causing us to have to rip out and replace all of our infrastructure, because if Chris and I were to go to our campus leadership and say, we're going to rip out and replace all our card readers, all our panels, all our parking things, they would laugh at us, right? In a really polite way, but we know that that's not feasible. And so I think that that's the other piece for us that made this a really good solution, is we're able to make it work with a lot of the infrastructure we have in place. Some of them we have minor modifications, but we're not talking about a heavy sort of physical plant lift. We're not talking about a heavy budget lift to make this work in the places that we need it. So again, I think, right, it's more fun to talk about all the cool things we can do and not talk about the budget attached, but that was a piece. And for me, as someone, who's working directly in student services, if this was a solution that then, a student loses their card and we're going to have to charge them $100 to replace it, that doesn't work. Our students just don't have access to that type of funds. And so knowing that we are able to manage our costs, keep our costs in a place where we're not then really overburdening our students, right? And we all know that good security does come at a cost and is important, but finding that balance of what's doable for our student body, and really what we're looking at the same type of replacement costs that we would have for the card we use now. Again, I think from the financial pieces all over, all the different users involved and stakeholders, that was the other piece I think that made a ton of sense for us.
All right, great. And I just want to touch on one more issue before we wrap things up. In terms of privacy concerns, what sort of controls and protections do you have in place there?
So it's from a access control standpoint, it's all the very same. So right now, only the access control administrators, which is myself and my assistant director in my office, have access to Linnell. And we're the ones that control and provision the access control system along with our vendor. Apart from that, no one has access to see any student data, any staff data that's housed in Linnell. And that for us is a very important aspect, knowing that we can keep that same construct, those same processes and procedures, where if Jen needs information about a student, they reach out to us. There's a formal process in asking for a report, an access report. That process stays in place. I'm not changing anything. All I'm doing is, again, replacing our beacon card with a Sentry card. They register their fingerprint. They do that once, and that's it. All processes and procedures stay the same, and the identity of students remains private.
Yeah, and the card is FIDO2
Yes.
compliant, meets GDPR, BIPA regulations. So for sure, it is definitely hardened, and it's made in USA completely.
All right, great. I think we're running up against our time now. So I just want to thank you all for joining us. Chris, Jen, Janet, great case study, and best of luck with the rollout.
Thanks.
Great. Thanks so much, Ron. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So today we are fortunate to have not just one, but two excellent keynote speakers. And we'll be closing out this event with our second one. Lori Floor is the Safety and Security Director for the libraries at the University of California, San Diego, including the flagship Geisel Library, which is a federal repository that is open to the public and has nearly 3 million visitors a year. Lori trains and manages a 24/7 team of security officers who are first responders for medical emergencies, disturbances, and criminal activity. She has more than 20 years of experience in the federal, municipal, and collegiate law enforcement roles and has served in security roles for Hurricane Katrina, daily armored vehicle transport into Mexico for Sony Electronics, and federal repatriation flights to Central America for ICE. In addition, she was the lead protective agent for the eldest daughter of the King of Saudi Arabia when she was visiting the United States. So thank you, Lori, for joining us online when you could be outside in that beautiful San Diego weather.
Yes, we always do have, what is it, sunny and 75 here?
Exactly.
And for those of you who haven't been lucky enough to visit, that is the Geisel Library you're seeing behind me. And if you go to the first slide, one of the things that you've heard today from all of the colleagues who've been so generous with their time is you have learned.
Give me just 1 second to pull up your presentation.
Is that security in higher education on any campus is really demanding. I started out as a sergeant on a community college campus, and it was a pretty easy job compared to all the different hats that I have to wear today. Every single one of the challenges that our different speakers have presented today, from working with the campus police, fighting crime. You can go ahead and probably even, take us to the next slide already. We have school policies, labor laws, workplace violence, active shooters, medical and mental health emergencies, civil unrest, emergency preparedness, budget constraints. I've got a whole second page after this one. If you can read through, go ahead to the next slide as well. So 2 pages of pretty significant sets of responsibilities and things that require my expertise, my knowledge, in addition to all the technical preparedness and setup that we've had from some of our other presenters. There's truly no way that any one person can manage this alone or in a vacuum. So go to the next slide. So one of the things that they have spoken about and that I'm going to actually touch on even further is you absolutely need to build a support team. And I would recommend to everybody who's on this presentation today, take the presenters at face value, myself as well. When we say feel free to reach out to us, you have our email address, you can reach out to us on LinkedIn. Do not hesitate when you have questions or you're trying to figure out how to choose a vendor or how to choose a product or how to go about finding a solution. Reach out and ask us, how did we get to that point? And truly internally, find out who it is that you can reach out to that can help you with your products. I have a really great library IT team. They helped me build a secure VLAN for my access control system. So I know that it doesn't go out to the internet, so I'm pretty safe from intrusion externally. I've got student interns that I actually use to supplement my security staff. I have a wonderful relationship with the campus police department, and we collaborate on all kinds of projects. I have external colleagues. Find out what kind of professional associations you have in the area. There's ASIS. There's a wonderful group called InfraGard, which is a public-private partnership with the FBI. They are always publishing threat alerts. They have trainings. Reach out to your vendors and your integrators. One of the favorite things for me is when SIA or ASIS have their conferences and trade shows. Take your vendors and your integrators with you and walk the trade show floors with them. Reach out to your government partners. I mean, look at the CISA presentation we had earlier and all the great resources that they have. You know, you truly have so many resources, and almost all of these won't cost you a dime. Next slide. Internally, try to figure out how much of your workload that you can delegate. If you're fortunate enough to have a team, you know, train up some of them for, you know, so that they have some individual expertise. Or if you are the team member and you're trying to advance your career, you know, find a way that you can become an expert, you know, be that access control expert. You heard somebody talking about their Linnell system. Hey, be that Linnell expert. I can't tell you how wonderful it is when one of my team members says, hey, I just completed a course on Excel spreadsheets. Now I've got somebody that I can delegate some of those tasks to. Another thing is, you know, I have a really great relationship with my facilities team. And a lot of times if I need to add some new card readers, they'll split the costs with me on some of the new door hardware that I need. So, you know, working internally can really save you a lot of money and stretch that budget. Next. Externally, a lot of those training materials, or if you need to do a tabletop exercise, those materials are absolutely free. The vendors, whether they're new and they're trying to get your business, or if they're people you've had relationships with for decades, you know, they'll give you statistics on their product, statistics on crime or use cases or case studies, you know, on other organizations that have used their products and why they've been cost effective. A lot of times too, they'll let you know who else in your community is using their product, or if you're involved in other professional organizations, your colleagues will say, yeah, I use ProWatch, come on over and I'll show you how that works for us. But, you know, I'm really a fan of getting out there, seeing products in use, you know, and see how they work before you actually spend your money. Next. And I'm going to share a pet peeve, and this is probably more to the vendors and integrators than it is for an end user. But when you're walking that trade show floor, I'll have somebody pull me into their booth and they want to sell me a ride-on lawnmower. And that might be the best ride-on lawnmower that you have ever seen. It might be the best ride-on lawnmower ever produced. But I live in a high-rise condominium, so no matter how good it is, I have absolutely no use for it. So take some time to get to know me and my business before you try to sell me a product. You know, I go back to our very first presenter who gave the example about having the gentleman who wanted to buy him a drink and spend some time. He got to know him as a person and learned a little bit about his business and didn't try that hard sell approach. And that absolutely paid dividends for him down the road. Or even if you do have this really great tractor, I may not need it, but I might have a sister who lives on a farm in Montana. So just think about, you know, your approach when you go to tell somebody about what it is that you have to offer. Next. So budgets and spending, that's something that's going to be really different for everybody. It depends on whether you're a private company or whether you're a government organization. Some people have access to grants, and so their money has to be spent in really specific ways. You know, like the example I gave earlier with the hardware solution, you know, sometimes internally you can find a way to split that money. A lot of times if I need new computer monitors, or when I'm expanding with cameras, or if I'm going to run new cable to add cameras or access control devices, I can get the IT group to pay for some of that infrastructure. Or a lot of times your vendors, have done other really big installs at other locations, and they can tell you, well, maybe we could do this part of the installation in fiscal year 23. And then once that's in place, we can do the second phase in fiscal year 24. So, don't be afraid to approach them, with questions about different ways to make your dollar stretch a little bit further. Okay, next. And another thing is, don't forget self-care. You saw those lists of 2 pages. This job can get really, really demanding. When you're on a campus, you are answering to student groups, you're answering to your immediate boss, you're answering to a chancellor, you're answering to, fire, compliance. You have so many people demanding so many things from you. And no matter what you keep providing, the ask doesn't go away. Almost the better you perform, the more ask you're going to get. And sometimes you just really have to take a step back, try to keep your perspective and try to find some balance, because a lot of us have 24/7 demands. I mean, just this weekend, I had some fire alarms go off, and it was during the time that the building was actually closed and secured. So of course, the fire department shows up, the police department shows up, my team isn't on staff, so they force their way in, and then I've got my burglary alarms going off, and I have a very sleep deprived weekend. So, trying to explain to the boss why I'm tired on Monday, fortunately my boss is pretty understanding, but you'll have a lot that you'll find just really don't have too much sympathy for you. So you have to make sure that you take the time back and try to stay balanced. Otherwise, you could find yourself in a really bad spot. And also, if you're able, say no when some of the asks and the demands cross the line. I know for us during finals, we stay open. We're open 24/7 or 24/5 during the school year, so that the students have a place to study overnight. But when it comes to finals, we're open 24/7 and we never close. So my team, they end up working, 12-hour shifts, and they usually have to give up one of their days off a week. But sometimes the ask will even increase. And sometimes I absolutely just have to say no, otherwise, they're going to get sick, and I might start losing staff. So, those are just other things to think about too in the big picture, because sometimes I think the administrators and people just forget that, there are actually humans performing these tasks, along with maintaining all of the machines and the devices, because anybody who's in this business knows that something's always breaking or needs some attention and repairs. All right, what do we got for the last one? All right, so in addition to the nice Geisel Library, which is the icon that everybody likes to come and visit, I've got buildings down at the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. I have the Wong Avery Library, which is where the biomedical sciences and study area is, and then a huge library annex. And we have hundreds of millions of dollars of art and archives and original notes. So we're also a huge cultural property, and so we have protection of that as another big aspect to what we do. And then being a federal repository, we're open to the public. So we're also the last stop on the trolley line. So we have another big piece of our job, managing the public and everything that entails. But my contact information is there on the bottom. And truly, like all of the others who are presenting today, do not hesitate to hook up with me on LinkedIn, or if you have questions now or questions that come up later, anything related to managing a security team, collaborating with campus police, campus partners, implementing and integrating any of your access control systems, your intrusion alarm systems, truly don't hesitate to reach out. And thank you to SIA for putting this together and supporting the trade shows and educational events that they do throughout the year.
All right, thanks so much, Lori. Great presentation. So we do have a couple of questions. One asking how many cameras you have on site and how you manage those.
I have about 250 across all 4 of the buildings. I have a security operations center that is manned, and then an additional small center in each of the specific buildings. So they're actually watched. And then the police department also has access into my cameras so that if they're going to be responding to an incident, they can pull them up as well.
Right. You mentioned campus police. Do you also work with SPPD?
The San Diego Police Department?
Excuse me, SDPD.
Okay. The campus police are, they're real police. So I don't know how it works in other states, but they're real police, just like the San Diego police are real police. So it would be like, they're like a true city police, just like the San Diego police are a city police. So we do have mutual aid with them. So they're a state agency, like the Highway Patrol is a state agency. So if we were to have a critical incident, they're currently on site, and then the others would come for mutual aid if it was something really large. We probably handle about 75% of the incidents in-house. If something is a big crime or escalates to an arrest, we would absolutely call them in to cover or take over for us.
Right. A quick housekeeping question here about the link to the recorded video. So it'll be posted within the next day or two, and we'll make it available to people who registered for the event. And if anybody does not receive that link, again, just reach out to me directly, rhawkins@securityindustry.org. So it looks like one more question at least, and that is, how did you choose your integrator?
The last question.
Well, I inherited a really shady one. So I really did like the software. So I went to the manufacturer, and then they recommended somebody who was licensed through them. And that's how they were chosen.
Very good. All right. I think that about wraps things up. Do you have any closing comments before we go?
No, just keep on getting educated, because everything changes so fast. It's hard to keep up.
All right, good parting words.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Lori. Thank you to all of our speakers for such great insights and information. Thank you once again to our sponsors, Access Communications and Century Enterprises. Very much appreciate their support. And of course, thank you to all of our attendees for spending part of your day with us. We did cover a lot of ground, so remember that recording will be available on the website. If for any reason you can't find it by using the search function at securityindustry.org, just feel free to reach out to me, Ron Hawkins, rhawkins@securityindustry.org. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.